28, 27, 26, 25, 24, 23, 22, 21, 20, 19, 18, 17, 16. What comes after 16? 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I do believe that it has begun. I counted backwards from 30. It was very challenging. And here we are, starting off day 2 of our awesome Institute for Anatomical Research Anatomy Summit, first ever in our doing. And so don't mind the quirks, including me. I'm the main quirk of this program. So you can see there's a new schedule up. Oh my gosh, it starts with moi. I'm going to chat on a little bit, but let's just set some ground rules for those who might have not been here live yesterday. The chat function is disabled. So sorry. So is the raise hand. We just don't have enough people to deal with it. But the Q&A is functioning. And so you can chime in on the Q&A, and that will be moderated by our helpers, Jim, our executive director, and Madhav Gramke, who is also one of our guests, one of our esteemed guests today. He'll be showing up at the bottom of this chart right here. So that's basically what there is to know, I think, about the setup. And since I'm the first one on the schedule, I'm just going to keep on rambling. So, but not really. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the NERV project, but I'm going to do so with Madhav's company. So Madhav's in the background here. We're in my garage. And you would never know from the incredible set that we've created here. Hey, buddy.
Hey, it's great to be here.
So it is great to be here.
Yeah.
Yeah, life is good. So Madhav and I spent a ridiculous amount of time in the lab together, haven't we?
We sure have.
And I was doing the math, just thinking about this conversation, just to give you a sense of how much value I have gained, as well as the world, through the lab, Institute for Anatomical Research. When Rachel and I came out here in March 2020, we never left. We came for a month and we're still here. So that's like 4.5 years now that we've been here. And I was calculating that of the 4.5 years that we have been in here, I have been full-time in the lab for 2 of those years.
Whoa.
I mean, like working on projects or teaching classes in the lab for 2 out of those 4.5 years, outside of which we were on the road for half a year already. So it's an intense service that the lab has done me in making that time available to do some really large projects. One of those large projects we called Anatomy from A to Z. And Madhav here filmed for 6 months on the Anatomy from A to Z project, which is more than anyone should have to stand there with a camera doing Tai Chi, filming over a cadaver with me vamping in the background. Not vamping. Is that what you call it? What do you call it when you're riffing? Vamping is like when you're like on stage and you're like having pasties and you're going like that. Isn't that vamping?
Riffing is
Riffing,
good.
thanks, that's better. Yeah, I was riffing, not vamping in the lab.
No pasties.
No pasties, thank God. And Rachel also filmed for 6 months of that project, being filmed for about 4 months. And other people who I dragged in, Carla and Andy and anyone who could breathe who helped out. So the Anatomy from A to Z project was an exhaustive tour of the human body by comparing Anna and Z. And about 2 weeks to the end of it, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to do the nerves. And it was like this kind of cloud opened in the heavens and a light shone upon me and said, you will do the nerves. And I was like, okay. And so it took me another 1.5 years just to edit the A to Z project.
And can I ask, why did we have to do the nerves? Did we not do the nerves in the A to Z?
We did a lot of nerves in A to Z. You could get a very good, better education than I've ever offered on camera on the nerves in A to Z. But when I looked at what I had filmed and emphasized in that project, we covered all the fascia, all the layers, all the viscera, every bone, one bone after another, every muscle, literally every muscle on camera. I was like, I think I have created a compendium of content that will be serviceable to the massage, yoga, Pilates, exercise physiology communities for 50 years. It should hold them. But I was like, what about the chiros? I was a chiropractor. What about the osteopaths, the naturopaths, the allopaths? What about all the folks who place a big emphasis on the nerves? I don't think I was thorough enough. I don't think I could be, because dissecting by layer in the A to Z project prunes the tree really hard. And as much nerves as I was able to demonstrate, basically, if you want to see the nerve tree, you have to destroy everything that I was trying to show in the A to Z project. Literally, you have to just destroy it, put it to the side. You have to macerate tissues in order to pull those tree branches out of it. So that's the thing. I didn't do that because I did the other thing. So they're kind of mutually exclusive. I think that's the bottom line of it. And so in order to create a real big story, a thorough story, a comprehensive integral anatomy story of the nerve tree, it had to be its own project. And I think it's true also the same. I'm not saying this out loud right now, but the heart tree needs the same treatment. And sorry, Jim, but I need a lab for 2 years.
Is that your outside voice?
Did I say those things? Oh, shoot. So you gotta be careful. I say these things and like my karma unfolds before me, and all of a sudden people are like coming from Mars to help me out. So the nerve project came along, and your pops passed away. So Madhav's father, his father, my friend, became the donor form for the nerve project, and what an extraordinary, crazy gift that was.
It sure was.
And continues to be.
Right? Yeah. Ever since I first started working at the lab, he was like, that's where I want to go. That's what I want to do. Because before that, he joked that, whenever I pass away, just throw my body on a bonfire in the backyard and just forget about it, in a joking way. And but once I started working in the lab, he was like, actually, I have a serious answer for you now. That's where I want to go.
Yeah.
And he really recognized the value of what we do in there and how many people it helps and this kind of thing. So I think it was really wonderful that he did that, and we were able to use his gift for this project.
Yeah, and that we both were able to suck it up or not. I wouldn't say we sucked anything up, in the sense that I didn't feel like I had to put anything aside in my love for your father or for you to do the project and objectify it. We did the exact opposite. We were like, there's a pops on the table, and we're going to take care of him. We're going to engage this form with the same respect that we do every other form in the lab. And again, I mentioned yesterday, that's what the lab is characteristic for. But it had an extra twist for us in the personal knowledge that we had, which really creates a different insight, I think, at some levels. Although, the nerve tissues, again, we could be like, oh, I've got a vagus nerve too. You've got a vagus nerve. So it's not like nobody has it, but it was definitely Captain's version of it. Not that you could say that because he flew airplanes, therefore his vagus nerve looked like that. Doesn't work that way. There's more embryological unfolding of our individuality that we were able to witness. But yeah, to see his individuality all the way down to the plexuses was pretty incredible. And since finishing the project, there was a 9-day break for me to put together a 3-hour talk for Eric Dalton's conference last July.
It was in Oklahoma?
Yeah, in Oklahoma. And then I was said to Rachel, we should take this on the road. And that's pretty much all we've done since then. We're on a break from our 110 city nerve tour. And, couldn't have done this without the lab. I mean, the lab was right, where else could I do that? We're some university or something, not going to work.
No.
Had to be at home-based situation. You have to live, we have to live here to do that.
Yes.
Right? It was really hard for
Yes.
Madhav during the A to Z project. He didn't live here. I mean, you moved in with us, but it wasn't your home base. You still had a house in Georgia.
That's right.
And so now that we're all here, we can do these incredible projects together. What did we learn?
Oh my goodness.
All right.
You fill a 5-hour talk with that and you leave out like,
I don't even get started.
yeah, we don't even get started.
But
So
I mean, big picture, let's say this. You can't stop learning. You can't rest on your laurels with your first exposure to anatomical information. You can only start with the basics. And the basics are a reduction almost to the point of falsehood. And so to continue the pursuit of learning is how you actually get somewhere, I think. Like if you just came in all cocky because you're a chiropractor and you taught some anatomy at a chiropractor school, right? And said, well, I know all this shit. This is my zone. Right?
my first time in the lab, I did have that attitude.
It's a little bit like that.
I was a little bit like that,
Yeah.
or maybe a lot of it like that.
We've been hatcheting away the pomposity for some time now.
That's right. I think pretty successfully.
I think we're doing well.
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
Because I mean, when I started out teaching anatomy, I knew I didn't know anything. Like I literally didn't know anything. And so I've learned from the people in the room, I've learned from the donors, so I remain a student of the people in the room and the donors. But if you do come in thinking you know something, then you gotta beat that down hard because you got your set of facts that you got was the A on the test. So how could I be wrong? Well, look at the body. Look at the body and ask the question again and see what the answer is, because the body is never wrong, right? No, your book is always wrong relative to the body. The body can't be wrong. It's laying it out in front of you. This is human anatomy. It's not dog anatomy, right? It's not elephant anatomy. If you're looking at a human body on a table, that is human anatomy. And I use that as the starting point, right? And then you say, well, how did they summarize that in the book? How did they schematize that? How did they put that knowledge into a taxonomy, right? So it's teachable or comprehensible to the beginner. But really, as much as our lab is a lab for beginners, and thank goodness for this amazing project of Bonnie's and Jim's in developing, Jim especially, I think, in developing the high school program, right? I mean, they were bringing them in for a long time, but I think, Jim has really contacted all kinds of schools. So there's beginner's anatomy happening in the lab, right? And I have people who don't know anything at all come and take my dissection course. And yet it's always offered with the consideration that this is a first pass. It's your introduction. Someone else who's at the lab for the 15th time, then they're going deeper, right? But like you could say, what is there to go deeper on? It's the stomach. That's stomach. Like, what more is there to know? Well, golly, that stomach looks exactly nothing like the last stomach. That one looks like a big, bag. This one looks like a rope. This one got rerouted. Were you there the other day?
Yeah.
We were in a class the other day.
Yeah.
And for the 200th time, I'm taking 200th, 400th, 500th time, I'm giving people a tour of the belly. And I'm like, where's the stomach? Where? I'm like, well, the way to do it is you just go to the thing you know and then follow the thing you don't know. But the thing I knew was there and the thing I couldn't find wasn't there. So it took us a couple of days. It took another day of pawing around in there to realize that this gentleman's stomach had been rerouted completely. And so it wasn't in the normal place. It was coming in the back door. It was going around the side. Remember, I couldn't find it.
Surgically rerouted.
Surgically rerouted,
Surgically
yeah,
rerouted.
like they cut the stomach at the pyloric sphincter, they cut the duodenum at the pyloric sphincter, they took it away. And then what do you do with those free ends? Well, they took the pyloric end of the stomach and they attached it to the free end of the jejunum.
Mm-hmm.
That was freed because it was right. They made a free end of the jejunum. They attached it to that, and then they took the end of the duodenum and some jejunum and stuck that somewhere else on the jejunum. So you had a jejunum and a jejunum, it was like a Y, a forked Y, and nothing went into the duodenum except the pancreas. It was crazy. Anyway, I draw it for you, but it's a whole other project. But this is the thing: if you think you understand, as a visceral therapist, say where the viscera are, well, take a good patient history, number one, and number two, it doesn't matter. They don't know what surgery they had, even if they tell you something, and
It could be wrong.
they could be wrong. And then also maybe they didn't know that they had an incompletely rotated gut and that their cecum is 6 inches higher than you expected it to be, which was the case on the other body in the same class. And so it's never the same. And so if you don't dive in and push it for your whole career, actually, you got to push it for your whole career. I mean, the questions that we were asking in the Nerve Project, right? We were asking questions and then pushing them. We were pushing them in the body, in Captain's body. We were pushing them in the books. We were pushing them in the programs and finding the mistakes, finding the disagreements. There were disagreements, and they're just outright errors.
Yeah. We looked at a lot of research papers. We read through a lot of literature and triangulating between all of those things and triangulating between, the form on the table.
Yeah, to try and tell a story.
Yeah.
Like, how do you tell a story when we had to tell our own story? And the team helped me develop the story that I told. Like, without you and Audrey and everybody Heather and
we had so much help.
We had so many people who committed themselves to helping us to develop a story to tell. Because if you just picked your favorite book and told that story, you'd just be wrong. You couldn't. It couldn't be summarized like that.
You might be right 10% of the time, which is not very high.
Not super high.
It's not very high. 10 is just off the top of my head. I don't know, but it's so to speak.
Yeah, or working with Complete Anatomy, which is a pretty famous program these days for folks who want to dive deep. And you think, okay, it's Complete Anatomy. What more do you need, right? It's everything. So we're looking in the nerve fibers, say trying to track or follow the story of the vagus nerve or the story of whatever. And something as simple as the graphic representation of the nervous system, like not changing the dimension of the pathway. So you'd think that this little wisp of something that's in the body is this big thick track running somewhere. And if you try and translate from that image, like Laurie was talking about yesterday, how the images impact your understanding of anatomy? Well, those images would lead you to assume or presume that there's some continuity of thickness in the nerves. But
there's no such thing.
No, body tells a very different story, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you go from a big branch to a thread, and that thread might have been represented as a cord in the graphic, but on the body, it's like, oh, I already cut that. I thought that was like so.
Yeah,
that was an education.
It's a map versus terrain issue, I would say.
Map versus terrain.
Yeah, and the map is helpful, as you point out so many times in all of your educational material. The map is helpful. We like maps because it's easy to navigate with a map. But if you mistake the map for the terrain, then that's an error.
Yeah, or if you judge the terrain based on the map, right? Which is what we do all the time. You show up with your map, and then you're mad at the terrain. Because it doesn't match. Instead of getting it backwards, you should witness the terrain and then say, oh, we got to fix our map. But if you're a teacher and you're wanting to push your knowledge further, well, gold star. But when you're confronted, as I am, I teach anatomy, and I'm confronted constantly, right? And I enjoyed watching you be confronted also from, right?
Which I was.
Yeah, it's
Like,
very,
that's not what I learned.
Yeah.
That's not what it's supposed to be.
yeah, that can't be.
Yeah,
Do you have any example that pops into your head around that?
The parasympathetic and sympathetic discussion, which lasted for weeks, if I remember
Months.
correctly. Yeah, months. Yeah. It seemed like it went on for forever. And we were just, hammering and hammering and hammering down into the books, into the research literature, and going back and forth between all of that and then what we were studying on the table. I was like, but that's not, why is it so difficult to figure this out? It's supposed to be a simple matter. It's already written in all the books. Why is this taking so long?
I think I have an idea. And the idea comes from an integral perspective, which is that the body is a whole, the nerve tree is a whole, meaning a unity, and the books have chapters and taxonomies, right? And so the taxonomy is a mental differentiation, a mental separation put on the whole that doesn't have any separation, that has only continuity. You're saying, well, that's this thing and that's that thing. Well, that's what the taxonomy says, but is that what's reflected in what you're witnessing? Or are you realizing that you're showing up with a set of mental taxonomies that are a kind of parsing of the whole that the whole doesn't bear out? It's just a way of seeing. But if you consider any other way of seeing, then the taxonomy kind of goes, whoosh. It's like a squirrel in a fan. Sorry.
Zoop.
Like,
and how much do you think was the author's intention to make it simple to understand, to make a map, so to speak, that's easier to understand than this thing that's as complicated as the universe, versus a left brain habit of wanting things to be distinct and separated? What do you think doesn't my question make sense?
I absolutely
maybe there's a little of both.
So I think it's a little of both, but whether it's the one or the other, if you don't have what's his name? You know who I'm talking about, guys. Ian McGilchrist, master and his emissary, writing about hemispheric differences and functional lateralization of our brain. It's fine to do that, whether your impulse is to simplify and to make understandable the complexity that you already understand, or whether it's the left brain fighting for a parsification or a reduction that it can comprehend. In either case, for there to be any real understanding, there has to be a final pulse of integration, right? So there's this whole complex thing, whether you're trying to teach it or just understand it for your own sake, right? And so you chop it up and turn it into boxes and pieces, and then you organize those under lists, like, oh, this is neural tissue, this is connective tissue, this is muscle tissue, this is epithelial tissue, right? Those are the 4 top taxonomical boxes of all of anatomy. Okay, fine. You've made your boxes, then you try and put everything in the boxes and you try your best. Well, there has to be a moment on the far side of that boxification that says, and I know that's straw. I know that's dust, right? I know that's like dandelions in the wind, right? Because that's not the reality. That's just my crude attempt at reducing reality so we can have a conversation. Have that conversation, right? Don't not have that conversation. Parse up the world and have the conversation, and then
unify at the end.
Have a cup of coffee together and admit that the whole thing was just that, just an attempt to have the conversation. It's not the reality. And I think that we go entire careers teaching, people go entire careers teaching, authors go entire careers mass producing books, and then believe their book and never get to that third step of reintegration, of remembering, literally, like remembering what happened, what you just did. did we go over our time shit?
It's actually perfect timing.
Oh, thank goodness.
It's absolutely perfect timing.
Sorry. Yeah.
That's a great
10:25.
That's a great place to end.
Right?
That's perfect.
Bringing it all together.
Bringing it all together. And who's next up? We got Bob next up.
Bob's coming.
Right
We got
on.
5 minutes so everyone can run and pee. Thank you for seeing me through my auto interviews.
Thank you. Thank
was
you.
fun.
Thank you.
You are fun. I love you, my
Fun.
friend.
I love you too. All right, here we go.
Okay,
Let's go
folks,
pee.
give yourself a couple minutes here and we'll be back. I hope that was more than mental masturbation and that you enjoyed the conversation.
Good morning, Gil. Good morning.
Hey, Bob.
Hey,
We're gonna get Jim to highlight you.
okay.
So we get a big picture version.
There
There
we
we go.
go. Awesome.
Nice to see you again shortly
Good to see
after
you.
our lunch adventure last week,
Yeah, exactly.
which was yummy and fun. Folks, I'd like to introduce to you Bob McAtee. Bob has been doing this stuff. Are we talking 4 decades here? You got a
Oh,
decade
yeah.
on me, and you're a prolific teacher and author, facilitated stretching, sports massage for injury care. These are massive texts, folks, with an amazing publisher, same publisher as Leslie, who we had on yesterday. And an early adapter to our beloved Institute for Anatomical Research. You got there before I did.
I am so glad that I live here and knew Bonnie and was able to hang out at the lab a lot in the early days.
Tell us about that. Tell us about
before you
the early
guys
days.
before you guys got so busy. It was fun to just be able to call up and say, "Hey, I have a little bit of time. Is anybody up there? Can I drop in and see what you're doing?" And
Yeah. And
that
what
was
and
just awesome.
would there be time?
Oh yeah, quite often, yes. It was also great to be able to say, I've been reading about this structure, that structure. Do you have a donor form that maybe I could come up and just have a look, peek around, and uh, Bonnie and Jim and I would stand around one of the donors and we'd talk about it. And I'm not sure exactly when Jim started the occasional Saturday drop-in
Hmm.
days. Uh, but those are really fun because you can just go and sort of wander around and look at look at and talk with Jim, and he's you know such a wealth of information
Oh, massive. Yeah.
on everything. And he's gotten so great over the years too. So it's really been I'm really blessed to live in Colorado Springs and to have Bonnie, fulfill her dream of opening a lab here.
Yeah.
And
Incredible, right?
and
So,
and I think did she say yesterday she actually opened the lab in 2012? Is that right?
2010, I think she said she like
20,
got the rental agreement in 2009,
yeah,
and then
yeah.
2010
So
I started working.
man, it's been a long time.
Yeah, it's been a while. So here's a
Yeah.
question that's popped into my head. Your
Okay.
book, your books precede, I mentioned them, for the folks at home, facilitated stretching, as well
Yeah.
as sports massage for injury care. You wrote those before that. Is that true or after? After your
Facilitated stretching came out in 1994, so it's been out
1994.
30 years. Yeah, that was
So
before.
that's a
Way
classic.
before.
Yeah.
It's a classic now.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
As are you.
that as am I. Yes, I'm an OG, I guess. Um, Sports massage for injury care came out in 2019, so that was well after the lab
So
was open.
So
So
then my question is, how did your adventures, play, inquiry, questioning, and visits to the lab both make you think differently about facilitated stretching,
mhm.
as well as maybe craft sports massage for injury care a little differently?
Well, my time, as many of us here today and through the weekend, we're all super interested in anatomy, right? This is
Yeah,
this is what
we're
brings us
junkies.
together
We're
as a small
users,
tribe, a
users
tribe
and
within a
pushers,
tribe.
right?
Right. So, I've collected anatomy books, and if I remember when the Travell and Simons book first came out, and those beautiful illustrations by Barbara Cummings
Oh
that
yeah.
looked nothing like what you see in the lab, but they were beautiful illustrations of representations of muscles. And
Mhm.
I've kind of collected anatomy books over the years, and um, as a sports massage therapist, especially, um, I like sort of the detective work of being of helping people sort out what their issues are in terms of, you know, do you have a hamstring strain, and if you have it, where you feel it, and what kind of tissue are we working with. But
Mm.
that was all, that's all based on book learning and palpatory skills and some experience. But as we all know, when you get into a cadaver lab and you're actually looking at physical, it's just completely different. As
Yeah.
we've all been saying, it's like, oh my God, I had no idea. It's
Yeah.
so different than what the books say. Um, so that has definitely informed my practice. And as I've been rewriting facilitated stretching,
Mm.
I've had a better idea of maybe how to describe the tissue. And the most
Mm.
recent edition, we talked about the whole idea that muscles and tendons blend into other tissues that blend into other tissues, and it's really hard to separate them out.
Yeah.
And facilitated stretching is based on PNF, which is a physiotherapy modality. And they
Could
were
you
back
could
in
you
the,
tell me what those, for everyone who's
yeah,
listening, what do those three initials stand for?
yes,
I know it's not FBI or CIA,
no,
something else. What was it?
PNF is a
PNF.
PNF is a acronym for proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation.
Damn, I'm glad they used three letters because that's a
They
lot of
use, yeah,
syllables.
that's a lot.
Proprioceptive
Neuromuscular
neuromuscular
facilitation.
facilitation.
I
Okay.
probably should have a whiteboard. Yeah. So that's why we call it PNF. Oh yeah, like you have. So that's why they call it PNF, because it's such a mouthful. But the
Yeah.
basic premise was trying to work with the the uh, the neuromuscular system to help rehabilitate, muscles and groups of muscles.
Mm.
So even back in the 50s, the founders of PNF were aware that we move not sort of we move in patterns of motion, and it's
Mm.
groups of muscles that work together, and not
Yeah.
just one muscle at a time. So
Right.
um, So as I've been studying more anatomy in the cadaver labs and trying to put that into the stretching book, which by the way, I'm working on the 5th edition right now. So
Wow.
that should
That's
be out in
incredible. That's some long
2
way.
years or something.
Yeah.
That's yeah. So we'll just have more information about, trying to differentiate between the fact that we all have learned origins and insertions and actions and what's the kinesiology, what does this muscle do?
Right.
It's really important to realize that it's never just one thing.
Yeah.
It's all together. And so uh, one of the things that I'm really happy to have been able to do is uh, back in 2013, I started, actually in 2012, I started thinking about a class because I was interested in the brachial plexus and injuries to the nerves of the upper extremity.
Mm.
And so with Bonnie and Jim's help, they were able to help prepare a couple of donors so that we could look at the 3 main nerves of the brachial plexus, median, radial, and ulnar.
Oh,
Ulnar, yes, thank you.
they get away from me too, believe me.
Yes. And so I proposed a class to AMTA Colorado, which they thought was a great idea.
Uh-huh.
We went up to the lab with a small group. I think there were maybe 20 people could fit in there in those days.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like a sort of a lecture, like here's the brachial plexus, here's the pathway of the median nerve, right, on the board
Mhm.
with the illustrations that we find in all the textbooks. And
Yeah.
then we all went over to the dissection table with the
Mm.
donor that had been prepared so that we could actually trace the path of the nerve and
Nice.
move it and show the nerve gliding and everything
Mhm.
like that. And so we did that. That was like a half a day class, and we went through those 3 major nerves, and it was astounding to me to be able to help prepare for that, and then
Yeah.
to watch the faces of all the students, and it's like, oh my God, they had no idea either. And so
Yeah.
so
Bringing
that was
dimension.
great. Yeah.
Yeah. And
And
relationship and
yeah,
context.
exactly. And we were able to then repeat that class in 2016 up in Longmont at Bev's lab up there.
Oh, nice.
And so that was really fun. I'd like to do that again, but you guys are so busy now.
We'll squeeze you
we'll
in.
we'll figure out a time to do
Yeah.
that. So I wanted to tell you a story too, because I think I
Yeah,
started
please.
to mention this to you at
Uh-huh.
lunch. I met my wife Trina in 1985 in a Ben Benjamin seminar on the shoulder, as a matter of fact. And
Congratulations.
yes,
1985. You're coming on in 2025. That'll be 40 years.
40 years that we've met.
Wow.
Yes,
Congratulations.
yes. Thank you. So I think it was our 3rd date. I just mentioned that I had seen a flyer about a dissection class. It probably was at San Diego State or something. And
Uh-huh.
I was a little hesitant to suggest that to her, because at the time, living in San Diego, living in a house full of body workers, I mentioned this to some of my roommates, and they were like, "Ooh, why would you want to do that? That's kind of creepy, isn't it?"
You're creepy, Bob.
But I mentioned to her at dinner, and she reached over and she put her hand on my arm. She said, "Oh, that's fascinating. I'd love to do that."
It's my woman.
So that's when we knew, the spark went, "Oh, I guess we're meant to be hanging out together."
Did she go with you? Did you go to that
Well,
class?
we never actually got to that class, and I can't remember why. It was probably time or money or both in those days.
Mm.
We were struggling then. But she did come to the class in 2013, so we finally got into the
Oh,
cadaver lab together.
awesome. Awesome. Did you have kind of like a
Usually.
Dia de la Muerta themed wedding or anything?
No, we didn't. So
Oh, that's awesome. Is she a body worker too? Then?
she's retired now, but she was a fabulous body worker.
Mm.
We also taught together for a long time. She taught she is taught with me, and then we taught separate classes. So
Mm,
we've been able to travel a bit and you know, around the US and internationally. It's
that's
been a
awesome.
great ride, really. So,
Yeah.
and I wanted to write the sports massage book because a lot of what I learned when I did my sports massage training back in the 80s, it doesn't
Mhm.
seem to be being taught anymore. And
Mm.
so that was the impetus for the book. And I do have a whole chapter now on nerve entrapment issues
Oh, yeah.
based on what I've learned in the lab. And so I took that short class I call palpating the nervous cadaver, uh,
Mm.
and now I teach it as a full day seminar. Of course,
Oh, it's
we don't
awesome.
have a lab. We don't have
Yeah.
a lab because I'm teaching at a massage school usually. But
Hmm.
it's uh, it's all been informed by the time that have been able to spend here in our local lab, and I promote it in all my classes and tell people they really should come. So
Nice. It is fascinating, these pathways through fascia that the nerves take, right? They infiltrate the fascia, but then they send
right,
other trunks right through the fascia because that's why I use the metaphor of the onion tree, right? We have this tree with its trunk and its branches, and those branches are perforating these textural layers of the onion tree of our body. They don't merely perforate them, they infiltrate them and perforate them, right? And as they perforate, the structure of that pathway is so interesting. You know, the nerve has its like perifascial sleeve, like this membranous sleeve, and the hole is lined with the same sleeve. And so there's this movement at these perforation points, or maybe not. Maybe there's
or
right strain at
yeah,
that perforation point, and maybe dehydration or inflammation or scarring at that pathway through. And then what do you do? What do you do, Bob? What do you
well,
what do you
yeah. What do you do? It's you know, and based on what we see in the textbooks, I mean, I've for years just thought, well, nerves are like wires; they're kind of flat, and you know, they
Hmm,
move, but we don't really think about them having their own layers upon layers. They're
yeah,
fat tubes
yeah,
full of it's tubes full of tubes full of tubes, right?
yeah. Even an
With
onion, even a
e- e-
nerve is an onion tree, right?
even a nerve is an onion
Yeah,
tree, right?
yeah.
And so yeah, what do we do when we have nerve entrapment issues? Well, we try to reduce the strain on the tissue. And how do we do that as body workers? It's through palpatory
Hmm,
exploration,
hmm,
you know, gentle manipulation, maybe a
yeah.
little nerve glide work, trying
Hmm.
to feel where is the strain on this nerve as it runs through its pathway, you know, and
Is that something you can
um,
feel and teach people how to feel?
that's what I attempt to do. I'm not. Who knows? As you know, what we're there's a lot of conversation on like, what are we feeling when when we think we're feeling something? Is that really what we're feeling?
Hmm,
So I'm just sort of going on faith based on what I've learned over the years from people like you, as well as the donors in the labs, and just 40 years of preparatory
yeah.
practice,
Well, there's
still
a
practicing.
lot to be said for that because, I mean,
Yeah,
whether we're feeling exactly what we think we're feeling,
right,
I say this thing over and over again. I just endlessly quote myself that we kind of hold our good practices dearly and the stories we tell about them a little lightly, right? So, in other words, your successes with your clients are not proof of your story, they're proof of your practice, right?
right.
So,
Yes,
when you
the story changes
yeah,
as
the
we
story
learn
changes,
more
but
about
the service you do
yeah,
is real,
yeah,
right? In other words, person gets off the table 2 weeks later, they're still feeling better. You know, you can't argue with that.
right,
You know,
right,
and then
exactly.
whether you did exactly this or that in terms of your story, well, who cares? You know, they're back to putting the groceries on the top shelf. Everything is good.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Or not, and then you go, well,
Hmm.
I did this and that didn't seem to work. Let's try this.
Try
And if
this.
that
Yeah.
works, if that appears to work, was it something I did, or was it time helped? You know, or did we just sort of generate the body's innate healing process and it figured, which is I think what we do,
Yeah.
body figures it out. You point something out, you bring attention to an area and go, well, we're going to stimulate this tissue and try to get some, maybe get some blood moving in there, get some oxygen and nutrients in there, and let the body do it. Really.
I so appreciate what you're saying. I mean, folks, I hope you can hear the humility that comes from 40 years of practice, right? At something where it's like, yeah, even after 40 years, it's like, okay, that didn't work. Let's try something else.
Right.
As opposed to, well, that should have worked. So my client is fired because
bad client. You're a bad patient.
Client.
I don't want to see you anymore.
Bad client. My story's right. My client is bad. Fired. Yeah. I mean, and I'm constantly humbled in the lab. You know, again, I just told a story with Madhav of like not being able to find the stomach. Like this
that was hilarious.
be hard, you know. So and yet there I am being humbled after whatever.
You're like, I have 4 anatomy books here, and they all show the stomach is here.
Yeah.
But in this donor form, not there.
Not there. Not there. Yeah.
And I think, well, so a lot of the donors that you have now are gifted to the lab, right? So now you have their histories generally. Is that true?
To the point where we like call the family from the table, you know.
Yeah.
And I was like, did so and so like have a broken rib? And we were like, yeah, had a little run-in with the cops. I was like, awesome. But in terms of humbling, like I called up the spouse and said, did he have a nose job? Because his septum was so huge. And I was like, that can't be real. You know? But that was another humbling moment. No, he didn't have a nose job. What the fuck wrong with you?
What are you bothering me for?
Yeah, exactly. So
well, I remember another story from the lab. I teach a class on treating piriformis syndrome. So we all know the story of the sciatic nerve. It goes over, goes under, goes through. Maybe part of it goes through, part of it loops over.
Yeah.
So I think it was Jim I was talking to. I said, Jim, if you ever find I'd really love to see like the sciatic nerve piercing the piriformis. I can't imagine what it would be like to live like that, right? Somebody who's so what it's been years now, Jim, and you may remember this, but you had a donor, an older man. I don't think you knew his history, but he had bilateral sciatic nerves piercing his piriformis muscles. And so it makes me wonder what his life was like. Did he suffer from sciatic issues his whole life, or is that really not a horrible thing to have happen? Is it only some people who suffer from compression of the sciatic inside the muscle? Yeah, you're going to say something.
I got opinions on that one.
Okay, good.
So the nerves can only pass through the muscle tissue, right? That's how it's got to get out to the periphery. It has to go through this thick layer of muscle tissue that it infiltrates along the way and also passes through. When it passes through the normal way,
yeah,
right, and we see the nerve going in between this named muscle and that named muscle, we're like, oh, good, it's doing what it's supposed to do. When it does something that's abnormal to our story, our perception, we're like, oh no, that must be terrible, right? But actually, it's exactly what it's doing everywhere else, but it's just doing it in a way that's in a pattern just unexpected by us. So there's no necessary pathology, right, that results from nerve tissue passing through the belly of muscle tissue. if you picture there's just one big muscle, right?
Right. Right.
And the nerve passes through it the way we expect, then we say, well, that's piriformis and that's this one. But what if it always did that? Then we would speak of piriformis superior and piriformis inferior as divided by the sciatic nerve, and we'd all be like, oh, great, it's doing what it's supposed to do. So it's not
True. I see what
necessarily,
you mean.
yeah, it's not
Right.
necessarily
Right.
troublesome. And with respect to piriformis in particular, which I just love, we have immediately above piriformis the superior gluteal artery and vein, and immediately
Right.
below piriformis, right neck and neck with it, the inferior gluteal artery, vein, and nerve in the inferior case. And so I always think to myself, why aren't those, maybe they're the problem, maybe, and we're just blaming poor piriformis. And then if you look from the inside of the
Yeah.
pelvis and you look at piriformis, it is literally pinned down, like it's getting its face smashed in by the plexus, the sacral plexus that's forming that sciatic nerve. And so if you look at it from the inside, you're like, oh, I think we have piriformis syndrome, meaning the sciatic nerve is irritating the piriformis muscle because it's being squashed by its big brother who's sitting on his head. And so I do love to play with that story as well. And again, if that's your story and that it hurts or it might be impinged because of that, and that brings your hands to that place and you accidentally relieve flow issues with the vein or the artery on either side of it, and it feels better. Well, again, your patient was served by your technique, regardless of your story.
Fascinating. That's great. Okay. See, I'm gonna have to drop into the lab now and go have a look at that again. Uh, because you're right, I hadn't really thought about that. The normal pathway of the sciatic supposedly is underneath the piriformis. And so yes, if we had named the underlying muscle also like this other head of the piriformis, it'd be like just like going through the upper the elbow, right? The two heads.
Exactly.
Yeah,
If you look at the
exactly.
sciatic nerve passing under in the normal or typical or most common arrangement going
Yeah.
under piriformis, it's also going over gemelli superior, right?
Right.
So it actually is just, and if you look at the tendon of the obturator internus and the piriformis, they actually fuse. So I would call it quadriceps trochanterus, right? So the four-headed muscle of the trochanter with gemelli inferior, obturator internus, gemelli superior, and the piriformis are four heads of a single tendon, and the nerve goes through the middle always of the quadriceps trochanterus.
Okay.
So it should always be irritated.
I'm gonna update my seminar with this information. I see.
This is fun. This is
Because we're all, we're always learning, right? We learn new stuff every day, and so
yeah, it's fun. And I just love noodling around in there and trying to figure. I'm fascinated by the near relationships of tissues because they really are significant. I don't mean to dismiss that at all.
Right.
But also to like poor piriformis, it's living underneath 3 pounds of gluteus maximus, right?
Right.
And you got to go through 3 pounds of gluteus maximus to get to the piriformis. Maybe it was the gluteus maximus all along.
Exactly. The poor piriformis is just the victim of bad press.
I know.
Right?
It's just this
Needs a better
friend.
needs a better media presence to explain it.
Yeah, exactly. It needs a promoter.
It's not me. It's really not me.
Exactly. Like I didn't do it.
I didn't do it.
Were you there when the sciatic nerve was in pain? I don't recall.
I don't recall.
Yes. These are jokes that only 2 people over
right
6 understand.
Well, all of everyone who's listening understands. I'm assuming because we're all into this stuff.
Yeah,
Pretty
I think so.
Deeply.
So are you still teaching workshops, Bob? Or do you teach around the springs, or do you travel? What are you doing?
Since after COVID, I've started traveling a little bit. I've recently been in South Carolina. I'm going to be in Portland in a couple weekends.
Oh, nice.
And then I'll be in Pittsburgh and supposed to be teaching in Dallas for AMTA, Texas.
Oh, you're not a little busy. You're all over the map.
Yeah. Well, yes, I'm not like some of our colleagues who teach a lot, I do 4 or 5 weekends a year probably.
Oh, that's
The
great.
rest of the time I'm here in full-time practice.
Full-time
And
practice.
some Saturday mornings I'm at the lab if it's a drop-in session.
Oh, that's so awesome.
And I may start to call you up now and say, "Hey, Gil, what's going on? Can I drop in and see what you're doing?"
Feel free. I hope you
If you're
will.
if you're not filming,
Yeah, no, please do.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
you'd be welcome. I mean, it's such an asset to folks in my classes as well when, someone of your caliber pops in and just opens up a conversation.
Cool. Great.
Yeah. No, the lab is there's room for you.
The door's open. Good.
There's room for you
Awesome.
in the lab. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
No, because these are, conversations that are so rich for anybody who puts their hands on somebody, both to try and conceptualize what we're doing when we're working, to bring it to the lab, and then when you're in the lab to just not drown in there like, oh my gosh, nothing's as I expected it was, but to have conversations that can help to translate this complex world and mystery that's on the table to what you do tomorrow with your clients and your hands.
Right. Because
It sounds like that's what you've done.
It can be so overwhelming to just look at any particular area in a donor form and go, "Oh my God, it's so much more complicated. Everything's all smashed together. And how do
Yeah.
you how do I untangle this? This doesn't look like the diagrams at all." So
Yeah.
then the question is, what are the artists basing their illustrations on? Are they just copying previous illustrations and noodling? You know what I mean? It's like,
That is a
are they in the lab?
Yeah, I have seen many artistic renderings that are clearly just tweaking other artistic renderings that I'm familiar with. So I'm like, oh, I can see this one was ripping off this one, and that one was ripping off the one before, and that person actually was in a lab, but they conscientiously made artistic decisions to their rendering so that, just like words, images are reductions, right? The artistic renderings are simplifications. If you drew all the tissue, all you'd ever see would be skin, right? You have to, you can't draw everything. And the things that you don't draw are still there in the human being, and yet they're not there in the artistic rendering. So the artistic rendering is a model, a reduction, and valuable.
And it's like you and Madhav, we're just talking about, we break everything down into boxes so we can learn, right? We have to learn in pieces, and then hopefully be able to put it back together. And then take that and translate it to what we do with our clients.
Yeah. Bob, how do people get in touch with you? What's the best way?
My website is called stretchman.com. That's the best way. I'm stretchman.com.
One word, no dashes, just Stretchman.
stretchman.com. I'm also active on Facebook. I have Instagram. I have a Twitter account. So LinkedIn.
By your name or by Stretchman?
By my name.
Okay.
If you just Google me, there's quite a few Bob McAtees, but look for me. Look for my pretty face.
If you type Bob McAtee to the word stretch, and we'll get this gorgeous visage here. Yeah. Awesome. Well, it's an honor to chat with you, Bob, to share your wisdom with our gang, to recommend you to them. And we so appreciate your recommendations to everyone of the lab and all that it has to offer.
Great. Thanks so much, Gil. Great talking with you this morning. And we'll get together for lunch again soon.
I look forward to it. And also, I'm going to be in lab June 3 to 13. Pop in.
Will do. Okay. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye. Folks, we have a 5-minute break. These 5-minute breaks are so valuable. I hope you got a chance to write down. Where's my eraser, PNF, proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. Holy cow, that's a lot of syllables for 3 little letters. So, okay, I'll be back in a few minutes, folks.
That was a good one.
And check my clock. I got 2 minutes until, unless Joe's already here, in which case we can launch him. Let's see. Joe, where are you? I don't see Joe yet. So that was fun. Oh, Bob says that he forgot to mention, I'm going to read this out. Bob says, I forgot to mention that we're giving away a copy of Sports Massage for Injury Care. Wow, that's an incredibly generous premium. Bob, thank you so much. And I'm happy to be able to announce that to everybody. I think we're having some kind of drawing at the very end of this thing. And maybe that will happen then. So awesome. If I get any more details on that, I'll let you folks know what's going to happen there. So, oh, there's Joe. So let's bring Joe on. Joe Muscolino, Dr. Joe Muscolino. Very excited to see Joe here and at the lab. Where are you, Joe? Okay, we're going to spotlight you and microphone you. Can I hear you?
Can you hear me? Yes, I can hear you.
I can hear you.
Wonderful.
Yay.
I love when IT works.
And isn't it traumatic and disturbing when it doesn't? It's
Whenever I go anywhere and something's wrong, I always ask who's under 30. You can solve it.
Exactly. I call my son, come help me, or Madhav or something. So
Yeah.
how are you?
I'm doing well. Yourself, Gil, and everybody.
Good. Nice to see you. Where are you?
So right now I'm still in Stamford, Connecticut, where I live. Actually, I'm in an Airbnb because my wife and I sold our home and we're buying another one. And
Oh,
it's
how
not ready
exciting.
yet. And then tomorrow I head off. She's in Vietnam right now teaching Pilates certification.
Oh,
And I
wow.
head to Korea tomorrow, and then she joins me there.
Oh,
We'll
my goodness.
in Korea, and then I go to Singapore to teach, and then I come home.
Wow. Okay,
Yeah.
folks, you get the idea here that we're dealing with an international star. Uh,
A
Joe Muscolino,
global lecturer is what I remember Bob King was described as many years ago.
author of massive volumes of books with amazing illustrations, a huge website with tons of content. Your work is being used in massage therapy schools all over the country, probably all around the world. How else can I big you up, Joe? Tell me more. Tell me more about what makes you so amazing.
Gosh. So
You've been
I
at
have,
it for a while.
yeah, well, so I was listening in with the whole Bob McAtee, which I love Bob. I know every time I go to the lab, I usually will go over to Bob's and film some videos of him, or we'll go
Oh,
to,
sweet.
is it the Keg, downtown in Manitou Springs to have a
Uh-huh.
bite to eat. I've met his wife, and when I was listening, I was thinking to myself before I started this, am I going to have a half hour of stuff to say? And then as I
Huh.
was listening to your conversation, I was like, oh, I want to add something here, and I want to add something there, and I want something here. And I'm like, okay, I need 3 hours, 5 hours.
I'm going to say, are you worried about a half an hour?
I know. Yeah. So I started going back to what Bob was saying. I graduated chiropractic school. So I as I describe myself, I'm an extremely soft tissue oriented
Hmm.
chiropractic physician.
Ah,
I still
nice.
am in practice after 39
Oh,
years.
I
And
wasn't sure about that. That's neat. You're still practicing chiropractic. Do you do
I
it like a little bit a day or once a week, or how do you do that?
when I'm not traveling, I have a treatment room in my wife's Pilates studio, and it's
Mhm.
5 minutes away, and it's very
Great.
flexible. So I
Yeah,
schedule patients, um,
nice.
and I do hour visits. First visit's 2 hours. So I have time for history, exam, report
Wow.
of findings, as well as, and most of what I do is massage by far, by
Uh-huh.
far, by far. If
Yeah.
I were forced to choose one modality, I would
Mm,
choose soft tissue manipulation massage.
awesome.
Yeah,
Do you
but
find
we
that
also
that
choose as
gets,
well.
does that like, they say there's a lot of ways to skin a cat. That would be the way that you get the job done through the soft tissue primarily?
Most of the time, I mean, so I'm going in the direction I didn't expect to go, but I'll say this part. If a chiropractor talks, I don't use the verbiage a bone is out of place,
Mhm.
misaligned, subluxated. I
Mm,
mean, there's times where some of those terms can have some meaning, but for the most part, I talk about joint function, joint dysfunction. Is
mm,
there not enough mobility, too much mobility? It's
mm.
the physiology of it, not a static picture of it.
Yeah,
And
sure.
if a chiropractic physician says, "Well, I adjusted you," "well, what did you do?" "Well, I put your bone back in place." You get dressed and you go to leave, and they say, "Okay, I want to see you again."
Mm,
And you say, "But I don't understand. You put my bone back in place, right?" And they go, "Yeah." Then why do I need to see you again? Because if it's back in place, then I should be fine. I promise not to put it back out of place. If I have a fall or a car accident, then I'll
mm,
come see you. But otherwise, I'm not going to put. And I guess the argument would be, well, why would you need to go to an osteopath or a chiropractic physician or
mm.
someone for joint stuff and see them again, or a
Yeah,
physio, etc. And the argument might be that, well, if myofascial tissue, or to simplify it, a muscle is tight,
yeah.
overly facilitated, locked short. How many ways can we say it?
Hmm.
That if it pulls on the bone, and a bone is a passive element, it goes
Yeah.
where forces act upon it, will move
Mm,
it. If
hmm.
there's more pull in one direction, the other direction, then sure, the bone is going to either lose mobility or
Yeah.
perhaps slightly misaligned from an ideal symmetrical posture. So in that regard, to me, it's always seemed to me that the myofascial system is more important than the skeleton itself.
Mm, mm. Yeah, it's sort of secondary as you see it and practice.
Yeah, I'll throw, like, in my family growing up, three of my uncles were and or are. I have an uncle right now who's been in chiropractic practice, private practice this year for 66 years.
Wow.
He graduated chiropractic school in 1958.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and he is still in practice, essentially full time. We call him Peter Pan. But we have them. We have three of my cousins, my brother-in-law and aunt, all in chiropractic. But the biggest influence on me was my father, who was an engineer, because
Ah,
engineers deal with force application.
mm,
Muscles create forces. Fascial
yeah,
tissue also can create forces, as we know from, fibroblasts becoming myofibroblasts, and
yeah,
your work and Tom's work and Robert Schlepp's work and all the other great people. Bones are passive. A bone can only go wherever something moves it to go. So to
yeah.
me, it makes more sense that myofascial tissue, soft tissue, extra articular, soft tissue, and intra-articular ligamentous
Mm,
tissue would be more important.
nice.
Everything's important.
Yeah.
More
So
important.
how has I mean, you are a famous anatomy teacher. How has what you probably did dissection in your chiropractic training? Was that your first exposure?
Oh my God, 6 hours a week for 6 months and 3 hours a week for another 3 months. Yeah,
Nice. So that was a heavy component to your training.
very much so.
So
Very.
I guess you knew up front that was important, and then you just was there a big break between showing up uh, at Bonnie and Jim's at the institute and your experience in your training, or have you been following that anatomy depth of interest this all throughout?
Yeah, there was definitely a break, but it was not the break from when I showed up to meet Bonnie and Jim. I was teaching cadaver labs in Connecticut at the University of Bridgeport
Oh,
for
nice.
many, many, many years, and usually they were observational labs. And then I did a 5-day dissection. But then when it was tough working with the administration. It was just very
I understand.
hierarchical
Yeah.
and getting the lawyers to approve. It was ridiculous. And then
I-
I was taking a cadaver lab, 5-day lab in Arizona with Tom Myers.
uh-huh.
There was someone there from Shanghai, China, Richard, who
Uh-huh.
told me about the lab in
Oh,
Colorado.
really?
And
That's
that's how
hysterical.
I got to Bonnie and
Oh my
Jim, was
gosh.
through Richard in Shanghai. And since then, I've taught with Richard out in Shanghai 3 times. But I mean, what a find
That
to
is so. And how did Richard in Shanghai know about the lab?
Richard was just really good at looking things up. I'm very
Uh-huh.
lazy that way. I tend not to look things up. I wait for people to tell me things.
That's awesome. Wow, what a loop-de-loop.
Yeah.
So you found your way there, and I know you've spent a ridiculous amount of time at the lab, and that the lab has been an integral part of the development of your work. And how has that worked out for you?
So first on just the level for everybody out there listening, if you have not been to the lab for whatever reason it would be, whether it's to go see Gil there or Carlos Deco or me or one of the other many, many people, or just an informal kind of thing that Jim will run, etc., the lab is a pure pleasure space. I mean,
Mm.
the fact that they don't call them cadavers, they call them teachers because they're the true teachers of what we're learning. That Jim is such a pleasure. If people haven't had a chance to talk with Jim and listen to him laugh, if nothing else, I
Yeah.
love Jim's
I
laugh.
describe him as the beating heart of our lab.
Oh my, absolutely goodness, yes. And then Bonnie would be maybe the mother figure that birthed it, created it, and then you have people like Candy and Kelly that make it run, and Carla in the
Right.
background. It's such a pleasure to be there because it feels like you're with family when you're with everyone there.
Mm.
And, it's a totally different feeling than going to other labs that I've been to that feel so cold and sterile. And then you
Mm.
walk outside and there's Pikes Peak and Garden
Right.
Spots is 3 minutes this way and the weather's always beautiful. And you never wonder where north, south, east, west is because the
Yeah.
mountain range is always running straight on the west side of you.
Yeah.
Please, everybody, make use of the lab. It is such a gift for us to have in the world of manual and movement therapies.
Yeah, and just the fact that someone, of your caliber has made such great use of it, and these other guests who we've been having on who are all lab people, all teaching at the lab. It's just I think it also demonstrates how needed a resource the lab is for our very large and at-large community, because, well, as you face down in your own neck of the woods at your own chiropractic place there in Connecticut, the administrative noxiousness, and I've, been in a dozen different universities or more. And I know, because each one of them, I had to go through those gauntlets of
It's very hierarchical.
administrative blocking, because they don't always want to share knowledge. For one, lawyers and deans are afraid of everything,
Yes.
and they're more concerned about being sued than about educating in the community. And maybe that's their job, so I can't fault them for it. But it does make it hard to get anything done at a lot of these places. And so the fact that we can go to the lab and make use of this resource that welcomes us with open arms and works, the amount of energy that Bonnie and Jim and Kelly and scores of others who have come and gone along the way, who have put out of their own time to make this resource available. I mean, where do you start saying thank you for that?
I remember once we were filming. I've done a filming of each individual muscle myofascial unit for my video streaming services, et cetera. And I've filmed hundreds there. There's beyond running labs there, et cetera. And all. And I remember once, it was the last day. I was going to be flying out the next day. I was trying to finish. I wasn't quite done. Two of the assistants were working with me. Lindsay was one of them. How wonderful Lindsay was. And at one point I said, how long can you stay? Because we're not done yet and it's almost 6 o'clock. And she said, as long as it takes. And that just got me immediately. It was just, they believe in doing the job right, and the job doesn't give right service. It sounds too pedantic.
Oh, I believe in supporting the mission, right? Of facilitating deeper understanding of anatomical knowledge through cadaver exploration, and to keep that going, because a lot of universities are cutting it out. Even they're getting anatomage tables, right?
Yeah, and I've looked into those, and those are not the same thing.
I hate them. They're flat, right? It's a Euclidean surface, right? It's this construct of a flatness, and you see, there's pictures of cadavers in there, but it's flat. I mean, you can't get your fingers around it. So how could you ever get there?
Very often people talk about the gold standard. I wrote an article at one point a few years back for ABMP's journal, I think, and it was about the value of being in a cadaver lab, and I think I called it the platinum standard, not the gold standard.
Nice.
Of learning. So you asked something about, the value of learning this, and I went into the lab itself and the experience there. But I will say, if I want to go into my philosophy just a little bit about teaching, is that I am, there's a little tagline for this Zoom conference. It's something about critical thinking, empowering creative application. And that's kind of, I organically came up with that as my mantra, is that if you know your anatomy, then you can figure out your physiology. In other words, if you know your structure, you can figure out your function. If you know your function, you can figure out function, pathology, pathomechanics. If you know pathomechanics, you can figure out how to assess. And if you can figure out how to assess someone, you can figure out how to treat them, which means everything stems from anatomy. And this is where maybe I'll make the statement, I say this fairly often, is I don't even love anatomy that much. I love physiology. But anatomy are the dues I have to pay for me to be able to speak about, have the fodder to work with, to understand physiology. And then from there, it all follows. And I will always say to students, I taught 24 years in core curriculum. I teach around the country and the world in continuing ed, is there's only really two things you need to know to be excellent at what I call clinical orthopedic massage, manual therapy, or it could be called medical massage or rehabilitative massage, or most every other English-speaking country in the world calls it remedial massage because you remedy a specific problem with which the client comes in, or registered massage in Canada. But if you're working with someone where you want to help get better a condition with which they present, that kind of massage, then there's only two things you need. You need to, well, let's make it three. I feel like a Monty Python skit here. There's only two. You need to know anatomy. You need to be able to critically think so that you can then work your way through to creatively apply. There's two things. The third thing is you need to be able to feel tissue tension barriers. If you can't feel a tissue tension barrier, you can be amazingly intellectual in your head, but you then will not know how to challenge the tissue, because working on something is changing what they have. If you're happy with what they have, if someone can abduct their arm at the glenohumeral joint to 93 degrees, and you want them to go to 94, you have to push them beyond 93 to 94, right?
Yeah.
If you make them go to 93 1,000 times a day for the next 10 years, they'll have 93 degrees. So you have to, in sports therapy terms, they call it overload. You have to stress the person, whether it's massage, stretching, joint mobilization, whatever it is. You have to be able to feel when their tissue starts to push back, starts to fight back, to be able to do orthopedic rehabilitative medical massage. But on the intellectual end, you need to know your anatomy. And I would lie awake at night for years trying to figure out, how can I figure out how someone doesn't need to memorize this, how they can just know it, how they can understand it. And with anatomy, for the most part, you have to memorize, except for the name. When someone throw out a muscle name, pick one.
Rectus femoris.
Rectus femoris. Rect means straight. Rectify the matter, get it straight. Femoris, overlying the femur. That tells me this muscle is lying in a straight line over the femur, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you use the names because 75% of English comes from Latin. So you look for cognates in English, and a muscle, coracobrachialis, will tell you that it goes from the coracoid process to the brachium. Brachium means humerus. And by the way, the musculocutaneous nerve always pierces the coracobrachialis muscle. I've never seen an anomaly on that. And that, to the conversation you had with Bob, does not imply that a nerve going through a muscle has to have a problem. It depends if the muscle is tight. The lumbar plexus goes through psoas major. So you have all sorts of places. I really think the whole piriformis thing is overbuilt. And if the nerve didn't go through the piriformis, it would be between the piriformis and bone. And bone's always harder than the hardest muscle. So I wanted to throw that in there. So you look at any name, and the name tells you something, and that's free information. Take it. Look for an English cognate, take it. But after that, you have to memorize anatomy. Anatomy is a naming game. But once you've got that, and you can close your eyes and visualize that structure, where it is, the contextual relationship of other structures, then your hands naturally guide toward it. Naturally guide toward what you need to do, but you can intellectually figure everything out. It all stems from anatomy.
It is so foundational. I couldn't agree more. Obviously, having also spent my whole career working with it, I think because it's so foundational, and I'm so non-confrontational that I was like, how do I, what's the bottom? What's the most basic thing that I could offer? In other words, I don't teach technique. I don't do anything like that. I literally, it's like the most common denominator to so many professions that I can have a room full of people. One's a chiropractor, two of them are Pilates teachers, a couple of yoga therapists, some massage therapists, a dancer, a photographer, an artist. They're all in the room together, and they all want to know more about this basic thing. And I can show the most basic thing, anatomy, and then people will leap off of that like a trampoline into their field and transform that basic information into service to people in 20 different directions and 20 different modalities and 100 different modalities. And it's so exciting to see how that foundational information, translates into service in so many directions.
And I can think of 3 levels of service. One level of service is maybe it informs their profession, even a photographer wanting to compose a scene with the body, or an artist drawing a body. Another is for us as therapists, practitioners, etc., teachers, how we help others by knowing it. And the other one is everybody has a body.
Yes.
Everybody, in fact, this used to be kind of like a soapbox thing for me, but I've tried to ease off on it in recent years because
Come on, lay it on us. I want to hear it.
Yeah,
Jump on
right.
this bandwagon.
I love Macbeth and Shakespeare, and I read Macbeth at least twice by the time I got out of 12th grade. And I learned about igneous and metamorphic and sedimentary rock multiple times, and I consider it all to be important. However, I never had an anatomy course by the time I graduated high school. We all have bodies. Unless you are unbelievably blessed that you can live to be 100 and die all at once, whatever, and never have a health problem. And then think about your parents, your siblings, your children, your friends. We all will need to make decisions, health decisions. To me, the most fundamental core course I can think of in an education system would be to understand our body and health. And yet that is given at best short shrift in a health class, at best. And I didn't even get that way back when.
Yeah, and this again to the lab's credit. I mean, they're having these high school programs and bringing hundreds of high schoolers a year through the lab, and it changes their lives, because they're not getting it, and here you get this thing that's so essential, so core, and it just opens them up to so many possibilities, both in terms of their career paths, but also the way that they relate to their own body. It's so personal, anatomy, and which is why I consider it with you to be like the ultimate democratizer. In other words, there's nobody on the planet who's not walking around with a body. That's kind of like the rule, right? You want to come here, you got to wear one of these, and then there's no manual, and you can go to be 20 and never be informed even the slightest bit with regard to the most basic information about your body. And so I find that there's kind of an appeal to anatomy well taught that transcends all politics, all religion, all everything. So I can have a room full of people with incredibly diverse, convergent and divergent perspectives on the world, who are all simultaneously in awe when they witness the human form on the table like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I wrote down 1 or 2 things here I did want to make sure I mentioned at some point.
Please do. Yeah.
These are soapboxes I will never get off of. And one of them
I'm going to push you up on that box.
Yeah, okay, no problem. I will jump up on my own, Gil, but thank you. I'll take 2 areas of terminology that I'd love to just challenge here, as they're kind of
sure.
house. And one is origin insertion terminology. And anyone that follows me knows that I dislike those terms intensely. And I just will say attachments. I mean, if I were to ask a group of people, what's the definition of insertion, most people would tell me, well, it's the attachment that moves. Or then they'll say, well, and I'll say, but it doesn't always move. The distal end or the insertion can be fixed and the origin can move. Oh, well, it's the attachment that usually moves. Well, in the lower extremity, we're usually in closed chain where the foot's down in the ground and it's locked. So the proximal attachment, the origin has to move instead. So in the lower extremity, it doesn't even usually move. Oh, well, it's the distal attachment. Okay, then call it the distal attachment. Why make students learning muscles for the first time not only have to learn a Latin name for the muscle and learn 2 attachments, but then have to be told, and no, this one's the origin and this one's the insertion. And even if they get past that, then they have this rigid thought in their mind that the insertion is what usually moves or what moves. So if I were to say something like flexion of my arm, everyone would immediately think it's this, but flexion of my arm, I don't know if we can get this here. Flexion of my arm is also that. My arm can move at my elbow joint, right?
Yeah.
At a joint, bones A and B can move.
Hmm.
And you get people, or even think about someone's posture. If my anterior tilters at my pelvis, the hip flexors are
Yeah.
tight, they'll pull my pelvis into anterior tilt. Now my pelvic angle changes, my sacral base angle changes, my lumbar spine has to have more lordotic extension to compensate to bring my center of weight back. Well, that comes from hip flexors being tight at baseline tone, overly
Yeah.
facilitated, locked short, whatever. But those muscles are not flexing the thigh at the hip. They're actually tilting the pelvis at the hip. It's the reverse action. It's the closed chain action. It's the origin being pulled and not the insertion. And to even really conceive of that, and that's what determines the posture all the way up the spine. It really requires the person to have a fluid, simple idea that when a muscle contracts, it pulls equally on both attachments, period, period, period. Whichever one moves is the one that has less resistance to moving. So I wanted to say that one, and I want to say the other one is I don't like the term joint action, because if I were to ask most people, I love this as a fun nuance of thinking or a trick question, I'll say to someone, what's the motion pattern created when the supraspinatus contracts concentrically? You know, what's its motion pattern? And almost everyone will say abduction, abduction. And I'll immediately say, not possible. There's no way. The supraspinatus cannot abduct your shoulder joint. Why not? Because it's not in the frontal plane. Abduction's in the frontal plane. It's in the plane of the scapula. The scapula is in ideal posture, 30 degrees, 35 degrees off the frontal plane toward the sagittal plane. So the supraspinatus abducts and flexes, but it can't do pure abduction and it can't do pure flexion. In other words, say that better. Joint actions are cardinal plane components of a motion pattern. Cardinal plane components are Cartesian, right? North, south, west, up, down, sagittal plane, frontal plane, transverse plane. And I would love somehow the world to stop using terminology that they learned from their teacher who learned from their teacher, and instead use a terminology that just makes more sense. So those are my two soapboxes. How to get it. There we go.
I'm
We love
for it.
soapboxes. Said
I'm on
with
board.
to the end of the fuzz speech.
I'm on board. I go off on these things along with you. I'll add this part that every named muscle tissue is in relationship over 100% of its surface. So why do we even prioritize origin and insertion as mechanical leverage points when I have never found muscle tissue through dissection that was surrounded by air, right? Right? So my question is always, what is the quality of the relationship at any given point along the way? And how does that affect, movement? Just another take on your soapbox that I enjoy very much.
Last thing I'll say is just many years ago, I took 3 different times workshops with Don Newman, who was a PT who wrote this amazing kinesiology textbook for joint mechanics. And he used to say that one of these days he would love it to have all the kinesiology textbook writers come together for a weekend and just talk about all the places where we have issues. Like, I don't really quite get how that functions. And isn't this cool over here? And I was thinking that when you were talking with Bob, what a great nerdy, geeky way, geek
That
out.
sounds super fun.
Yeah, it does.
Like, hash it out. Get a pool, get a bar, get a whiteboard.
Yeah.
And just go at it till there's a transformed conversation.
Yeah, which I'm sure there will be pretty quickly. Yeah,
Super
even just
fun.
listening to your idea of the sacral plexus compressing the piriformis, and the piriformis is the victim. I love that. Never thought of it that way.
Awesome. It is such a great pleasure to chat with you, Joe, to bring your insights to this community, to value your use of the lab, which keeps it going, the lab's availability to you, which keeps you going, It's a great confluence of energies that we all appreciate so much. I appreciate you.
Oh,
And
honor and pleasure, certainly.
thank you for being here to treat us with your time and insight.
I'll just give my website. Is that
Please, yes, thank you. That
Great.
was the next thing I was going to launch into was how do you find you?
Yes. Oh, I'm right here. So sorry. So my website is one word, learnmuscles.com.
Learnmuscles.com.
Yep, learnmuscles.com. I have
Fantastic.
video streaming subscription programs for therapists. I have an online subscription program for schools. And to offer something to folks who are here, if anyone is interested in subscribing to my Learn Muscles Continuing Education, which right now has somewhere around 3,700 videos in it and over
Amazing.
20 hours of NCB, TMB free CE content. If you're a new subscriber and you go in and you sign up in the coupon box, if you put in IAR, Institute for Anatomical Research, 50, IAR 50, then that's a 50% lifetime discount. That's good
Amazing.
until May 27th. And I never offer 50%. I have never offered 50%. That was in honor and thank you for Bonnie and Jim and all of you folks over at the lab.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Joe. We appreciate that. And this is recorded, so all those words are going to repeat, and I'm sure Carla will get them typed out in a way that people could read it as well. So learnmuscles.com, folks. Head on over there. Joe is a rich resource and deep. We're talking not only deep in terms of his personal experience and the length of his career, but well, that's a seriously deep website. So enjoy it.
Thank you very much, Gil. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Joe. Okay, that was awesome. How fun. Joe Muscolino, folks, Dr. Joe. And I'm looking at my list here. We're going to go to Jules, my dear friend Jules Mitchell, in a few minutes. It's 11:36. She's coming on at 11:40. So that gives us 4 minutes to, get a beverage, do what's necessary. I'll see you in a minute. Unmute. I am unmuted, folks. I am back. There's no muting me for long. Oh my gosh, there's a discrepancy between the watch and the computer. I have 11:39 on the computer, which has been known to be wrong. So where is that Jay? Is that Jay for my dear friend Jules Mitchell? Is that what that Jay is for? Are we going to bring Jules on? Yay! Woo!
Hi,
Hi, Jules.
how are you?
Awesome. Just hanging out with your book. Oh my gosh, is she an author? It's
Yes,
her
I
book?
am.
Look at that. What a beautiful book. Jules Mitchell, Yoga Biomechanics, Stretching Redefined.
Mhm.
But here's the person. Let's connect with the person. How are you?
Excellent. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
We're happy to have you honoring our summit. We've reached the summit together, Jules.
Mhm.
We're
It's been a long time coming.
a
Here we
long
are.
time coming. It's been a long crawl, a long crawl to the summit. Are you in Las Vegas at this moment?
I am in Las Vegas at this moment. Yeah.
Are we in your
It's the
library?
official beginning of summer, so it's
Is
getting
it?
hot. Well, it's Memorial Day weekend, so yeah.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
I'm not
Mhm.
aware of these basic temporal phenomenon. Living at
In
the
the city, it means the pools are open.
Oh, that's great. That's fun. We actually were in Las Vegas.
I know.
What a fun place. We actually had a great time.
Good. I missed you. I was out of the country. It was
No.
bad timing.
I was
Really
sad.
bad timing.
Is there any other place where we'll cross paths where you might be teaching or I'm teaching?
I'm looking. Maybe Southern California. I'll come and see the Nerve tour.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I think you're going back that direction, aren't you? I
Yeah.
think you are.
But you're coming here too, aren't you?
Yeah, I actually in like 2 weeks. We have a lab in
Awesome.
3 weeks, end of June. Yeah.
You're going to be here. Your class is a week-long class?
4 days. I do 4 days.
4 days.
Yeah.
Great.
If they want a 6-day or a 10-day, I send them to you.
Oh, thank you. So Jules Mitchell, you are kind of a famous lady. You teach all over the place. You have a whole bunch of people who study with you. You teach at our lab. You teach at large. What is your interest for the sake of our audience? What's your thing?
Yeah, I'll tell you my thing and a little story about how I got here.
Yeah.
My thing is mostly yoga. That's how I entered this world.
Your mother was doing a yoga pose and you just entered the world. Is that?
Yeah, I think so, actually. But that's a different conversation. But
Yeah.
that could be possible. But that's how I entered the world of anatomy, the world that that you and I are in right now in this little bubble, was through yoga. And I remember just, being fascinated by what we were doing, and feeling very conflicted because every class I went to, I got different information. You must bend your knees in a forward fold. You should never bend your knees in a forward fold. Like your joints should always be stacked. And then the next pose, they're not stacked the same joints aren't stacked anymore. Or sometimes the joints must be stacked on the front leg, but the back leg, they're not. So even within the same pose, it was like we're talking out of both sides of our mouth. And I wanted to understand, I've always been a smart kid, so I wanted to understand. And so I ended up, long path of life, but I ended up enrolling in a graduate program. And it was for kinesiology, right? That was like what I was going to do. But my undergrad was women's studies and mathematics. So I had a little bit of work to do, a little bit of catching up to do. And they had looked at my math background, and because I'd done some extra engineering studies, and they had funneled me into this thing called biomechanics. I had no idea what it was. And it was in a tissue mechanics class one day where they're like, presenting graphs of tendon behavior and things like that. And I was literally looking around the room with my mouth hanging open. Like, these are the answers that yoga teachers have wanted. You know what I mean? Like, because the rule was debate on bending your knees or not bending your knees in a forward fold was because we were all trying to prevent tendinopathies, because every yoga teacher has one thing in common, and that is that they want to keep their students safe and give them a good experience. Right. So all of a sudden I was like, oh, there's actually information on this. And it totally transformed everything that I was already teaching, out in the world, but it completely transformed everything for me. And hence, did a master's thesis, and then the book deal came, and now that's my thing. It's biomechanics.
So, but not merely biomechanics, but with a view to serving, a population of people who are using their bodies in a way that they want to do well and understand. And now you have like maybe, some keys to unlock some of those questions.
Yeah.
And do you teach yoga too? Is that something?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I don't teach public yoga classes. That last one was 2015. So I teach yoga teachers. Does that make sense? I run the continuing education programs. I run advanced teacher trainings, that kind of stuff. So within that, yes, sometimes they get a yoga class, but it's not, you can't come to the local studio and take a class with me.
No, so you're facilitating teachers in their teaching. I mean, it's very much like Rachel. Rachel is a teacher. Teachers,
exactly.
I teach anatomy teachers. I get it. We're meta, very meta.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
So, and
for me, it's really, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm assuming that for having delved into this knowledge, you've accrued a basket of insights, not least of which are piled into your book, that you're so that this can be applied, right? So that this information can be applied.
Yes. And so I think that's the essential part of all of this, because there are a lot of biomechanics skeptics out there, and I've just listening to Joe's conversation. Yes, there's so many debates on how the body works and what language to use, and there are no true levers in the body, and biomechanics is based on Newtonian physics and lever systems. But as all models are useful to some degree. And so, of course, when we do some of these
when taken as models, right? When taken as models, and you can get very far with them.
Yes, exactly. So I think like the two big biomechanics terms are the kinematics and the kinetics, right? So the properties of movement and the forces during motion. Those are the two fancy terms for that. And so when we apply them to the human body, obviously, because human tissue is, behaves differently than, construction materials, right? So obviously they don't truly apply, but we can glean information. We can start, using some calculations to figure out how much force could potentially be acting on a joint, things like that, So for me, those are like the two big fields that got me into the study of biomechanics. But what it really changed everything for me was this other side, and that's the tissue mechanics side. And that's the side where we're really talking about connective tissue properties. What does it do when it's under tension? Does it get loose like an elastic waistband, or does it get tougher, and does it get better at resisting that tension? Those are the big questions, right? Not really questions anymore, but they were for me in the beginning when I was first learning anatomy. It was like I learned that a tendon connects muscle to bone. Well, that's what you learn in your anatomy class, but you don't know what the tendon looks like, what it's made of. You don't understand it behaves like a spring. Like there's so many things that come forward in the study of tissue mechanics. And so for me, that's like, I'll take some of the, other biomechanical concepts and then apply it to this area of biomechanics. So that's essentially why the subtitle of my book is Stretching Redefined, because it takes stretching and removes it from a very small window, which is range of motion, because that's how most people talk about stretching is, range of motion, and it takes it and redefines it as tension and what happens when you put tension on a tissue. And you can put tension on a tissue in things that are not classical flexibility exercises, right?
Yeah.
You can put tension on a tissue lifting weights. You can put
Yeah.
tension on a tissue jumping. And so these are the questions that I pose. What is does the tissue, does the tendon, does the cell know the difference between a passive flexibility exercise stretch and, hopping, right? If I'm jumping up and down, can it tell the difference? These are the inquiries that I love to look at. So,
yeah. And I'm curious, given that set of super interesting inquiries, is that what brought you to the lab? Is that, in other words,
yes.
To like put your eyes on it?
Yes. I remember the first time we spoke, because you were doing phone interviews before we could come to the lab. So this was maybe 12 years ago. And I was walking across campus and you called me. I had applied and you called me and I answered the phone. And I was explaining to you my situation. And you were like, well, my lab is not I was like, I'm on campus right now. You were like, my lab is not a very academic setting. I don't know if you're going to like this.
Fair warning. Fair warning.
And I was like, no, that's perfect. That's what I want, because I didn't want to be given what I should be looking at. I wanted to ask my own questions so that I could come up with a thesis topic that was not, regurgitated from my thesis advisor's work before me. And I was very lucky to have a thesis advisor who pushed me into making my own decision and coming up with my own thesis. And so that's what I did. I came to see the IT band. And then, once I saw that.
You came to see the IT band, but you stayed. So tell me, first, you saw the IT band. How were you informed by that? And then you just went down the slippery slope.
Yeah. Then I just couldn't stop coming back.
Yeah.
So it wasn't particularly IT band, it was the whole experience. But I think the big narrative shift for me, which is now what the basis of my work is for yoga teachers. Now, if you have gone to a commercial gym and hired a personal trainer, these stories sound familiar too. So I think people across all movement modalities can understand where I'm coming from. But the big narrative shift for me was really how the body has, evolved to be intentional, deliberate, resilient, and the stories that we like to tell, if you're, in this position, this will happen. If you bend your knees, you'll tear this. It's like, okay, if you were going to tear a tendon, by some passive stretching, like what's happening to the bodybuilders when they're putting, a lot higher tension on their tendons through, muscle contractions. So it really shifted the narrative for me. And that's, why my labs are like the shorter kind of 4-day labs, because we really just talk about these topics, topics that are important to yoga teachers. The IT band is supposed to be thick and stiff, and it's not supposed to be very, very, I hate to use the word stretch because it's so loaded, but it's meant to have a little elasticity, right, and spring back, but it's meant to resist, connective tissue, we always say, it connects, but it actually is for force transmission and force resistance. Like that's what it's for, and when you have that narrative,
right?
Yes. And when you have that narrative, things start to shift. You start to be less in your teaching, you start to be less catastrophizing, less fear mongering, instead of saying in order to protect your knee, do this, it's like, well, this is a place your knee can go, or that you just change, or this is how it looks in yoga. But not like if you do it any other way, it's going to be damaging, I've seen in the lab. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I don't want to lose what you were just about to say, but from what you just said, reflecting backwards, has that shift for you allowed for a more coherent narrative around cueing and movement and such? Because you started out at the very beginning saying there was these like inconsistencies, even opposite statements about certain things. So have you, as a result of this, been able to create kind of a more coherent cueing or instruction that doesn't say, well, you know, I don't know if I got.
Yes and no. No, I got the question. So yes and no. You know, it's not more cohesive because really, truly, it depends. You know, but I think what it has done is it's the study of biomechanics, surprisingly, and specifically tissue mechanics, has opened up a pathway for me into the world of pain science. And so I think that completes the picture, because we know that tissue damage and pain don't correlate well. You can have a perfectly structured tendon and have pain. You can have you can be, you know, have a full rotator cuff tear and not have pain. And so I think what happens is when you look at tissue mechanics, you understand behavior, and then you understand a little bit of pain science. Now you are really more sensitive to the person's experience. And so it's not a yes or no answer, but it's like, well, you know, this position might hurt someone's knee. And in that case, there's a different conversation. But is it inherently because the knee is incapable? Is it because the knee is weak? Is it because the knee is troubled? That's not necessarily the case, you know, I mean, aside from compound fractures and, you know, things like that. But in general, can it still tolerate some load? So, you know, to me, that's like the perfect marriage is biomechanics and pain science. They answer each other's questions.
Nice.
Yeah.
So then back to the lab. So, because I sort of derailed you there, but I wanted to hook that into the beginning. So now you're there, you're having your ground shifts, but you keep on coming. So why did you keep on coming to the point where now you're teaching in the lab?
Yeah, well, I kept on coming for the main reason that I loved the non-academic aspect of it, because when you read volumes of research the way I was, things become very two-dimensional. You know, you're looking at, and I'm talking about tendons a lot. I know, you know, Gil and many people here in the fascia world, because my graduate degrees in exercise science, I tend to be more in the, you know, athletic realm of, you know, tendons, ligaments, et cetera. So I talk about those tissues a little bit more. But, you know, when you're looking at papers on tendinopathies and stretching, and you're looking at ultrasound data, and that's all good and useful, but sometimes you just need to be put in an environment where you're forced to question the limitations of that kind of data collection, right? So I think, you know, science has, you know, used to be so observational, right? And it's just shifted. And so for me, it was the observational experience. It was where I got to think. It was where I got to formulate new narratives, you know, come up with stories to help yoga teachers understand, come up with my own little models. So that was why I kept coming. And sure enough, I would see something I'd never seen before every single time. And it shifted, you know, the way I thought about things. You know, when I was preparing this morning, I was thinking how so many yoga teachers and trainers and, you know, Pilates teachers were all like given all these rules of like, you know, don't do this because you're going to injure this, and this joint can't handle it. And, you know, too much external rotation, you're going to get a labral tear, and too much joint friction, you're going to get OA. There's all these like warnings. And I was thinking, not once in the lab have we ever sat around and been like, you know, oh, look at that rotator cuff tear. Oh, look at that. You know, like you might see a little OA in the knee and you're like, oh, look, they had OA, and you move on. You know, it's like you see these things and you're like, why in this other realm is it so catastrophizing? But when you're looking at it, like nobody's like, oh, this poor person had a hamstring tendinopathy. I bet they couldn't walk, or, you know, like, like you don't see those things, because even in the presence of that, the tendon is there's still good tendon there. It's still resilient. It's still does its job. So I think it makes people less fearful, you know.
Nice.
And the one I want to give one little story just on with the lab, but the SI joint, like the SI joint is in the yoga world, you know, the joint to protect at all costs, right? The most slippery, most, you know. And this is the important thing with pain science. There are a lot of people with SI joint pain, and that is a valid, true experience for them, right? But does that inherently mean that their SI joint is, you know, incapable of transmitting forces, which is really what its job is. You
Yeah.
know, no, because they're standing right there, you know, so it's doing its job.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we'll do in the lab, and Madhav, who always assists me, and he's on next, we have a little story that we do together about the SI joint, and people can feel, we skeletonize the pelvis, and they can feel it, and they can try and slide it around, and you know, they're never successful. But you can, when they have this experience, when they feel it,
Doesn't happen.
they're getting their leg up on the table, trying to move it, you know.
A hammer, a club.
Yes, a saw, literally, you know. But you can see in their faces the shift. It's like you know, you see them light up and get lighter because they're like, oh, if I give this one cue, you know, it might hurt the person. Yes, like might it be painful, but I'm not harming them. You know, the integrity is there. The low back is another one. You know, like there's so much low back pain conversation. We just want to protect everybody's lower back, and then you see the size of the lumbar vertebrae, and everything changes for you. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
So I think that's what I keep coming back to the lab for, and that's what I teach in my labs, because I want people to see the resilience of the human body.
Yeah, and this resilience that we can witness even in a 92-year-old dead body,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
In other words, it doesn't have to be a 25-year-old yoga lady who's on the precipice of the cliff somewhere. It's like, no, even in that old body that's passed away, there's so much health that it brings you to tears. Like, oh my gosh, we are so wondrously built to be able to witness that.
And when you look at the data, the age is so important, because when you look at the data, which we now have a lot of data on abnormal tissue findings, you know, abnormal connective tissue findings in asymptomatic populations, because now we're trying to reconcile biomechanics and pain science. So we need data. And, you know, we have volumes of research now looking at, you know, 96% of adult men have shoulder abnormalities, including tendon tears and bursal thickenings. And, you know, so 87% of people have bulging discs at one point, like, so all these asymptomatic, you know, situations. And that's, again, what you said with the age, like, you know, the older we get, the more likely we are to have these wrinkles on the inside. That's what Greg Lehman calls them, wrinkles on the inside. And again, when you're in the lab, nobody is spending time looking for these little wrinkles, because this 90-year-old person has so much robustness that if you did happen to come across a little of a degraded meniscus, it's inconsequential to the beauty of the knee itself, you know, the entire structure. Yes. The older you get, you're still resilient.
Yeah, that's just an awesome, valuable insight and thing to ponder. You know, I just can't help but think of how many lumpy, bumpy, highly functional bodies I've seen, and the stories that people love to weave about them. You know, oh, that must have been so tragic, that bump on their lumbar, but no, they didn't know they had it. Nobody knows
they had it. Yeah,
it had nothing to do with anything.
Exactly.
And everything's fine. And we're like just looking at oak forests. There are burls on the trees. They heal. They, you know, we're something that shocked me. I just have to bring this in during the A to Z project. Z had about a block of 8 fused vertebrae. I mean, bone grown over the discs from one to the other for 8 in a row. And I love to play with the motion potential of these things. And even the ones with bony fusions could flex. And I was like, golly, you know, like our bones flex. So even if you have like bony osteophytes joining one vertebrae to another, you can still move. And as a yoga person who's, you know, facilitating teachers and helping people move, right? Like even like people could say to themselves, oh, I can't do that because my vertebrae are fused or something. It's like, well, actually, you can invite movement into those places and they might unfuse. You could reverse that. They're fused because he's not moving so much. If he moves some more, they dissolve that. I mean, it's just
100%.
incredible.
So I mean, the bone was laid down because of the forces acting on it. It was there for a reason, and it can be undone.
Yeah.
I also like that statement, oh, I can't do that because of this. And it's like, well, because like, to me, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like if you can't do it, then you should be trying to do it, because then you'll get that. If it's like, if you can't do this, this is a great yoga thing. When we were told this, that shoulder flexion, was problematic, so do this. And okay, this is an excellent workaround instead of taking your arms overhead and warrior one. This is an excellent, but it will never get you here. So it's like, if you want to get here, if you want to flex your spine, you should be flexing it. And you can only do what you can do. If it's not flexing, it's not flexing, but you should be trying to flex, because it's the only way to get to flexion. If that makes sense.
No, absolutely. It's sometimes if we say I can't do it, then it's like saying I won't do it.
Yes.
Like there's a certain level of like, where's the agency come in? And of course, we were talking yesterday with Joe Fee about bony morphology differences. Yeah, sometimes there are places.
Then you just can't do it. But also, is it bad to go toward it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's the question.
Yeah.
So.
And sometimes we jump in a little quick and cut ourselves off from our potential. I think that's like in every phase of life, and certainly on the mat, as they say. So what you up to, Jules? What's coming? What's coming in your world? So you're coming to the lab shortly.
Yep.
For a 4-day class. What are the dates of that?
June. It's like 25th to 28th or something like that. It's the last week in June, Tuesday through Friday.
Is there room?
There is room, actually. We have actually 3 cadavers in that one. One unfixed and 2 fixed. So there will be a nice comparison. You want to see the IT man in 2 different ways. This is the lab.
Yeah, good.
So that's coming up, and there is room. Yep. And then I'm coming back in October.
Oh, amazing.
Yep.
Okay. So 2 classes coming, and then you're at large teaching. Can people access you who don't
on my website? Yep. JulesMitchell.com. My name, super simple.
JulesMitchell.com. 2 L's in Mitchell.
Yep. 2 L's in Mitchell.
JulesMitchell.com. No space between Jules and Mitchell.
Nope. Just my name.
JulesMitchell.com, folks.
Yeah.
Go to JulesMitchell.com if you want to hang out with you.
Yeah.
I have so many.
It's yoga stuff.
Yeah. I have so many good memories of just seeing you in the lab you always come with a friend or 2, and so quietly just standing there and looking at each other and looking at the body and talking and like conjuring. I'm like, what are they doing over there? They're reframing the world is what they're doing. So you can do that up close and personal with Jules in her classes, and I hope you'll check her out and go to her website and buy her book.
Yes, the book is yoga based, but actually anyone that wants to understand connective tissue mechanics and a little bit of pain science can benefit.
Totally universally applicable.
Yeah.
I appreciate you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate you too.
Thank you for gracing our summit.
Yes.
Here in the shadow of Pikes Peak, we're holding a summit. So we're not quite 14,000 feet, but we're just right for the Institute for Anatomical Research, where all of this fun stuff happens, folks. And I'm grateful for you being here, Jules. Thank you.
Thanks for having me in your life.
A pleasure. And Madhav says hi. Let me spin the camera around to my disastrous office.
Oh, hi, Madhav. Madhav and I are a team in the lab.
They are a team in the lab. Madhav and I are a team in the lab.
I know you are too. Yeah.
So, yeah,
that is
good
very
stuff.
true.
Awesome. Okay, we're going to have a little break, and we're going to come back, and we're going to bring on Madhav. Okay, quickie breaky. And I'm going to have a quickie breaky, folks, because that's what I do. I drink coffee and then I have quickie breakies. Unmute.
Those would like you to mute.
They're like, what are they talking about? We're just doing dumb boy jokes.
Boy jokes. Yeah.
So, okay, we are back, folks. Thank you for being here. And my illustrious guest at the moment,
I don't know how illustrious.
who was interviewing me
I'll take it.
just 2 hours ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, plenty illustrious in my life. Is Madhav Gramke, Dr. Madhav Gramke, for your degree in
Chiropractic.
chiropractic.
That's right.
So, what's that? Is that a 4-year program?
That's right. Yeah, I got a 4-year bachelor's degree in health sciences and then 4 years of chiropractic program that gets me a DC at the end of my name, which is Doctor of Chiropractic.
Dr. Chiropractic.
That's how that works.
And I was interested to hear from Dr. Joe earlier that he's kind of a soft tissue-y kind of chiropractor. And I was like, oh,
You know another one like
I know
that.
another one like that. Yeah.
That would be me.
So,
Yeah.
And why is that?
Well, I mean, as you very well know, most of the body is soft stuff.
Oh, stuff.
Most of the body is soft stuff. So I think that if you only work on joints, then, as many chiropractors do, and they have their reasons for it, and they're totally fair reasons, I would say. But especially for the chiropractors that like to work on short time windows, which not all of them do, but many of them do, and in that case, it's like, it's fair enough, work your joint work and go on to the next person. But for those chiropractors that like to have longer time windows, like I do, and like Joe obviously does.
Yeah. Big time window. Who's saying an hour?
An hour is amazing.
2 hours to the first session, right?
Yeah, my first session is 1 hour, which is mostly conversation.
Uh-huh.
And I do 20-minute adjustment slots as my kind of favorite time length. And yeah, so then that gives you the chance to work with all of the other stuff in the body.
Right.
Yeah. So I have a lot of fun with it. I like doing broad scope work.
So, unlike Joe, who we heard had a intensive dissection program, right, in his training, he's a generation or so, prior to you. They didn't offer that at your school.
That's right. Yeah, and it's funny because when I signed up for the program at Life University in Atlanta, Georgia, it was sold to me as, you're going to have a cadaver lab experience, because they did have it still open at the time. But when I finished my undergraduate studies was maybe 2 years after when I signed up and got accepted into the chiropractic program. And by that time, they had gotten rid of their cadaver program, much to my frustration.
Dang.
So their cadaver lab was replaced with anatomage tables, which is, I have very, very mixed feelings about that.
Well, probably at the time, not having any other experience, you probably learned a lot from the anatomage.
I mean, sure, I learned a lot,
but not what you learned from cadavers.
But no, it has nothing.
Even though it's pictures of cadavers.
And it's not even a picture of a cadaver. It's a 3D artistic representation. It's not even actual photographs.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, I think the way that the anatomage people do it is they do CT scans, and then they color in the CT scans with like digital artistry, like your son would do. Except for he's doing it with he makes his own characters from scratch. Yeah. So at least here you have the CT scan to begin with, but in any case, it's all colored in stuff. And at the time it was more new technology. So there was many mistakes, and my anatomy professor spent maybe a third of his time talking about how frustrated he was of all of the mistakes that he's, and that was like, okay. Thank you for voicing your frustration. And also let's focus on learning something, maybe. I don't know. Anyways.
So that's what drove you to the lab.
That's what drove me to the lab. Exactly. Yeah. I was, because of some technicality, I wasn't allowed into the cadaver lab at the University of Central Florida. And I was like, no problem. I'll get my experience at Life University. And then when I didn't get that, then I was like, that's it. I will not accept to not have this as part of my experience. If I'm going to put DR in front of my name, I can't see how I could not have this as part of my education. And so that's when I found you, and here we are.
And the rest is history.
And the rest is history.
Yeah, so you came and you came some more and then joined on to the projects which have been monstrous. And you're still here too.
And I'm still here.
Yeah, we've sort of moved into the Institute for Anatomical Research. And you teach your own classes now.
And now I'm teaching
which
my
is
own
wonderful.
classes.
To chiropractors who are
That's right.
from these places that aren't using dissection.
That's right.
So
That's
that's
right.
fantastic.
For the people who feel similarly as I did, you know, that they want to have this as part of their education, you know, they come. And for the people who are like, that's gross, you know, then that's fine. They can learn from their anatomist
They can
tables.
pass, yeah.
Yeah.
So our topic, as you described it, was going to be kind of impact of dissection on bodywork practice. So
Yeah.
what do you think?
Yeah. So if you don't mind, maybe I'll start with an analogy with
Yeah,
like a
please.
little story.
Yeah.
Analogy based story. So this is maybe not 100% dissection, but anatomy in general, I'd say. So something that musicians really maybe they don't enjoy it so much, but something that musicians very typically do is they practice scales. Right?
Yeah.
There's various scales.
I had a trombone player in my house
There you go.
for many years.
You know, so over and over, and they're practicing their scales. But why are they practicing their scale in the songs that they actually play? When they're playing songs, they're not playing those scales. Maybe they'll take a little bit. Maybe
You
they'll
hear
take
little
ideas.
pieces of them in jazz, right?
Maybe you'll hear pieces.
Yeah.
But in general, you know, you're not going to hear just straight scales in a song. That's not. But they practice the scales anyway. You know, and so why do they do that? Well, I think there's many reasons why a musician would practice scales. You get the technical practice for the fingers, you know, the accuracy of finger placement. You get the dexterity of learning how to move your fingers around. And also, if you are really doing them well, you listen to yourself as you play, you know, and you hear the quality of what the note sounds like whenever you do that. So what I mean to say is there's many reasons why you would do this, even though you're not going to execute it per se in a song. And so to me, learning anatomy is like practicing scales. You know, you might use bits of it here and there, but generally you're going to put that in the back of your mind, you know, and then have that as a foundation upon which you can do your work, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm also reminded of something
And
that
these are some pretty complicated scales.
complicated scales.
I
That's
mean,
right.
Like, I mean, there's not, you go around the world, right? And the European music scales are of a sort, and then you go to whatever.
Arabic scales sound totally different.
Or
You
India
know,
or something
Indian
like that.
scales sound totally different.
Yeah.
And then you have the major scales and even within the Western system, you have major and minor, you have pentatonic, you have all these kinds of different scales.
Yeah.
And practicing a bunch of them is really helpful, you know.
Yeah, and I just think of the anatomy, like there's a lot of notes, right? So you practice in your scales, now what?
And so then, like I've heard you say a couple times, you know, I want a surgeon working on me who says like, I'm willing to accept that I don't know everything, but you don't want a surgeon who has no experience to say that. You want a surgeon with a lot of experience.
I don't want the janitor operating on me.
Yeah.
God bless him. But that base of knowledge that leads you to a level of opportunity to witness the uniqueness of the person and to adjust accordingly. I want there to be something, a container, which is adjusting, not just no container. Like, no, I've never done surgery before. I got this knife here and I'm going in. Like, no, that's not the container I want for my surgeon. But I do want the surgeon to have humility and experience, right? So experience, like Bob was saying earlier. Like,
yes.
Like, yeah, 40 years and it's still humbling, you know, and you approach this with humility and you just keep on learning. That is the model for work. But I like that 40-year container in there.
That's right.
Or that anatomical base that you're talking about.
The anatomical base. That's right. Because as a body worker, you want to, at least I want to, you know, be like in the flow, so to speak. You know, I want to be like in an intuitive flow state for me, that's how I like to work. But if I didn't learn anything beforehand, then a flow state wouldn't be substantial. It wouldn't be sophisticated. The sophisticated flow state comes from when you do your homework first,
Right.
and then you go into the flow. That's,
Yeah.
to me, that's the good stuff. And that's what I'm looking for, in my studies, and what I would like to share with the people who learn with me.
Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. And then another thing that comes to mind is something that we kind of talked about earlier, which is like learning distinct parts, and then but at the end bringing it all back together in an integrated way of thinking. And another musical analogy comes to mind. I'm really into music. Is, let's say a musician hears a piece, a musician hears a song, and they're overwhelmed and impacted by the piece as a whole, and so they say, oh, I want to learn how to play that.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So then they're going to analyze and chop up the song and say, oh, we have a little transition here. We have a time signature change here.
Mhm.
This little thing happens here. And they analyze it, to pieces, literally. But then at the end, whenever they go on stage to make that performance, they don't think about any of that stuff. They put all of that analysis in the back, not in the front. They put the analysis in the back, and then they re-enter and bring it all back together into an integrated whole. And then, so like that, that's another,
That's the pulse. Yeah.
there you go. That's the good stuff.
Yeah. That's
Some-
beautiful.
Something like that.
So with respect to the body work, then you practice your scales, you learn your anatomy. And as I understand it, professional musicians who've been at it for decades still practice their scale.
That's right.
Right. And I can tell you from my experience, I don't know everything about anatomy. It's easy to stump me, because it's a massive universe.
Like that stomach we saw a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, so easy to be stumped. And so you practice your scales, meaning the anatomy, you go to a session, you put it in the back of your head, and then you go into your flow.
That's right.
Uh-huh.
That's how I would say is the ideal way to do it.
Mhm.
And maybe some people disagree. Maybe some people like to work in a routine. A lot of body workers like to work on a routine, and then in that case, maybe it'll have less of an impact. Maybe it would be less important. If you're just like, no, I have this routine and I do this routine on everybody. Even
Might be a
then,
little boring though.
even I would
I'd
be
go
so
crazy.
bored. I would go crazy, but that's fine. There are people who enjoy that. They like that structure,
Absolutely.
and that's fine. But
It's a
even
groove. You could say a routine is a groove too. You could call it kind of their flow.
yeah, nice. And learning a lot of details and continuing to learn might be less impactful in such a case. But even still, I think still it would make it more rich, if you learned more. But if you're someone, like me, who likes to work intuitively and kind of like customize the session for the individual person,
Uh-huh.
for the unique expression that's on your table, I think learning anatomy is just like, it's so powerful.
So you're not done yet.
On the way, I'm just barely getting started.
Just barely,
Yeah,
just scratching the surface.
That's right.
And do you, I know you have a passion for anatomy kind of for its own sake as well, because it's just fun.
Because it's just cool.
It's cool.
Yeah.
But it is also, I think, as it was for me when I started learning, it was primarily in service of my practice.
Mhm.
Like I wanted to know anatomy better because I was putting my hands on people as a rolfer.
Mm.
So are you finding your practice enhanced?
Very much so.
Because you
Very
just
much
keep
so.
going with the anatomy, so I'm assuming, and you keep going with your practice, kind of like Joey's does both at the same time. It's cool.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, very much so. Very much so.
uh-huh.
Feeling textures in isolation
Mm.
when you through the dissection process, that's one of the benefits of the dissection process is you can get a handle on individual textures,
Touching the spinous process,
exactly.
and the skin is gone, and the superficial fascia is gone, the deep fascia is gone, and your finger is on it.
Can get a handle on exactly that very specific thing,
Mhm.
and so then whenever you work with a living person and it's all a unity,
Mhm.
then it's easier to sort of be like, oh, that's the this thing and this is the that thing,
Mhm.
and then having that texturally in your body as opposed to theoretically, mentally in your body that you learn from a plastic model or from the book or from a PowerPoint,
Yeah.
which is the only way that I learned in my education, you know, outside of the lab. You know, it's just so much better.
Yeah.
It's so much better. Yeah. And also the relationships that we were able to grok, you know, like how, because in a plastic model or in an Anatomical table, you hit delete or you go, you know, and that's it. But obviously that's not how it's put together.
Right.
There's a textural relationship. And so what is that like? Is it light? Is it firm? Is it in the middle? Is it rough? Is it smooth? Is it what, you know? And so those understandings are also extremely powerful for, as a body worker, I think.
Yeah, I think that from the start for myself, that was all about texture. Like I feel something when I'm touching, I go to the cadaver, you have to translate it, right? A fixed body or an unfixed body. Neither of them feel like the tonus of a living human being.
Yeah.
So and yet within the context of a fixed body or an unfixed body, meaning embalmed or preserved only by refrigeration, either way, they're not the real thing, but there are still the difference in texture between skin and subcutaneous adipose and membrane and fascia, and whether it's in a fixed body, an unfixed body, or living body, those differences hold, right? In other words, there's still different. In other words, a bone feels different than skin in a living body, in a fixed body, or an unfixed body. There's always that difference. That's why I said I could build a model out of cloth, just as long as I incorporated different textures into it, right? To convey that these textural differences are real, regardless of whether this is an exact representation of the texture, because you go from one person to another and the texture is going to be different, right?
That's right.
And different people's fatty tissues feel different. Different people's muscle tissues feel different.
That's right.
You know, and you palpate that every day. That's your job.
That's right.
Right. So it's people are like, well, what's the value of working on a dead body? Like when you work on living bodies, because you can still learn the differences there. You can learn the shapes, you can learn the textures, right?
That's right. That's right. I like an analogy that I've heard you use a couple times in the lab, which is studying a riverbed. You know, ancient rivers that are no longer flowing with water. You can study their bed that they have impressed upon the earth. Footprint, exactly. And you can learn a lot about what the river was like.
Yeah.
But there's no river there. You still
learn.
It doesn't matter. You can still learn a lot about the shape and the movement and the pattern and all this kind of stuff. So I think this is a beautiful analogy that you give. Yeah. Yeah.
So do you call chiropractic body work?
I do. I think body work is you know, maybe like at the top of the
big category.
That's the big category. And then within body work is a lot of different subtypes, you know, different styles. And even within chiropractic.
So I'm just imagining that there might be a couple chiropractors out there who would feel a little maybe
slighted
by being called a body worker, and yet you're a chiropractor calling yourself a body worker.
And
so you're just not your
with all the love in the world I have for my profession. I would say that might be a pretentious idea to say that we're not body workers. You know, what else would we be? You know, and we're body workers.
Yeah, I guess it's that 4 years as opposed to say you're in an 800-hour massage program. That'd be a pretty good massage program. That's what Rachel did. Get a pretty solid education right here in Colorado. Colorado Institute for Massage Therapy. Got a solid education, 800 hours. But I mean, 4 years of schooling is a lot. Or my friend Keelan Wu, he's a biodynamic craniosacral osteopath. You know, he did the 4 years of medical school. He did like 2 years of residency, 2 years of internship, and then X many years of practice. Ultimately, he's at a table holding somebody's head. And so is someone who went to some shorter program. So there's the foundation can be pretty big. Like my friend Russell, who's a modern dancer, he's known for modern dance, but he used to be known for ballet. He was in the Royal Ballet. He was like the primo ballerino or whatever you call it. He was like a famous dancer who then left that world. But with that foundation, what a difference it made for the way he moves as a modern dancer, right? So I think that you might, you know, when you have 4 years or 8 years of education underneath the movement or the touch, and you can also achieve that through experience. I mean, someone like Bob who's been 40 years at a table,
Sure.
you know, is like, that's a serious palpation skill. Or
Sure.
you develop something that can only be developed through time, you know, but it's just, yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, another thing that we learn a lot in chiropractic school actually doesn't have anything to do with body work. A big portion of our program is radiology and diagnostic, you know, sciences, if you will.
Yeah,
you know,
sure.
and so that is all in the history portion before you even touch the person at all. So, you know, I think that that's a different scale, if you will.
Yeah.
You know, of like a really, really interesting, fascinating extra layer upon which you can base your body work on top of.
Yeah, your judgment and
Yeah,
and your
exactly.
touch. Yeah,
Exactly.
just like the anatomy.
Exactly.
That's a different set of scales.
The different set of scales. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe another thing I'd like to bring up is the stories. It's something that you were talking with Joe or with Bob, maybe with both. You're talking about, you know, the stories lightly and the practice dearly. And I think something that dissection specifically is really helpful with is to sort of investigate how good the stories are. Can I say it that way? You know, like some stories are good, some stories are awesome, some stories are kind of blatantly silly to me. You know,
Do you have anything in mind?
and not that it matters
in the lab.
And yeah, like what you learn in the lab, sort of like points that this story is a really seemingly solid story.
Yeah.
And this other story is like kind of silly, actually.
A little leaky.
Yeah. Yeah. So do I have one example? Yeah, my favorite example is the SI joint story. You
We're
know,
just talking about it
with Jules. Yeah. I love doing this with Jules. You know, I think it's one of the first.
What's the story that the chiropractors tell?
The story that chiropractors tell
Is this
that
the one that we're gonna poke? You're gonna poke a hole in?
I'm happy to. You know,
Okay, what's the story?
Much to
what story did you get that
I find frustrating is that the SI joint can easily slip out of place, and that with an adjustment you can put it back into place,
and it'll stay there,
and it'll stay there until it doesn't. In which case you need to go back to the chiropractor and have them put it back into place for you again.
So my SI joint is out.
My SI joint is out. Please put it back in.
I got it in.
Yeah.
So, but people are having an experience that story makes sense for. Right. I know as a person with some hypermobility issues in the vertebral column, that my back going out was a serious experience. Right now, what exactly was happening, I honestly don't know.
It's hard to say, isn't it?
But you know when it's out, it's like your jaw is upside down, like it is out, and then it doesn't go back in a second. It would take me about 4 days for it to go back in. And in just meant I was no longer having boluses of muscle seizures in my back that made it so I couldn't walk. So anyway, I'm just before we
a little more context
go too far on it. It's like, so people have an experience that they call out, right? And they have an experience that they feel is in. Right. And then you look at the tissues.
And then in addition, I'll even bolster the argument even more, which is, you know, you have the experience of going out, you go to a chiropractor and you get the SI joint adjusted, and then you feel better.
Yeah.
And you feel that it's back in. So what the heck?
Yeah. You know? The distress, the body's own fight or flight response goes down because believe me, you're falling apart. Yeah.
You feel better. So what's up with that? You know, I think it's a really good question. What's up with that?
Yeah.
But, you know, on the other side of it, I find the SI joint to be so robustly situated that I have a hard time believing that if you put someone in a side posture position, which is side lying with the thigh, flexed up, and you get a chiropractor to get kind of over on top of it and give it a good drop, the click that you hear, I have a hard time believing that cavitation is coming from the SI joint. It seems much more likely to me that the cavitation is coming from L5 on S1 because that joint moves way more than the SI joint seems to, and so, and then whenever you get that movement, and
not to mention the ligaments that you have to cut through to even get to witness the joint surfaces, right?
That's right.
And there's a lot of goodies in there.
Yes.
It's pretty well built.
It's very well built. It seems to be very solid to me. And
So
then
maybe the cavitation story is pointing in the wrong direction.
I think so. And I'm happy to be wrong. I'm happy to be kind of like modifying my own story of what
Both of our stories probably will change.
I hope so.
If they don't, we're not learning anything.
There you go.
Right?
There you go.
So
Yeah.
So do we take stories away that are half-baked, or do we just let them ride for the fact that the practice is good?
I think that's a good question.
Because if I'm out, I want to be in. And if
Right.
someone can help me be in, I'm going to pay for it.
Right.
Right.
And if someone says like, hey, I feel my whatever it is out, can you help me? I'm going to say yes, I'll do my very best to, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do my work to the best of my abilities. And afterwards, if you feel that it's back in, well, then great. I still don't know what happened.
And it might be achieved through soft tissue work without any kind of high velocity
Yes.
thing.
Yes. Yes.
I have a false story that I think I told to you, and you're like, I don't think you ever said that, which was Palmer is the guy. The chiropractor guy.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Sorry, it's like a god, but I'm like,
No.
Yeah, Palmer. It was a quote that I repeated many times, or maybe it was Andrew Still, that if you address the soft tissues properly, then the bones fall into place. And same reaction I got the first time I told that story. Don't know that he ever said that. It's just a quote I have from some, maybe Einstein said, Einstein said everything, right? And you see posters, Einstein, these incredible flowery things Einstein said.
It sounds to me more like something what Still would say.
Still might have said that.
I think that it sounds more like Still.
Okay, so the basic thought that, which might alter the story of like bones fall into place, would suggest that they were out. And I do think that they can be maladjusted, but here's what I think about that maladjustment. I think that our whole system can feel extremely off, even when something precious is a little off. And I think the SI joint is kind of precious. I think L5, S1 is a precious place. Up here, C1 to the occiput, C2 to C1. These are there's sort of some extra precious spaces in our body. And they can be the slightest bit off. And because they're so foundational to posture and movement, I don't know if there's such thing as posture, but posture and movement, so essential to posture and movement that the offness is amplified and perceived as a massive dislocation when it might be only a very micro thing. Similar in the opposite direction to the way that a craniopsychotherapist with their hands on the skull and they're like palpating what are essentially like fluid movements and pressure changes inside the skull that are, to my mind, projecting out through the fabric of the tissue. And they feel these really microscopic movements, but they're so used to feeling them that they feel like, and their hands are literally amplifiers of sensation. I'm sure you feel this yourself when you put your hands on people. So you're feeling this big, obvious thing, but if someone else put their hand there, they wouldn't feel anything at all. So that maybe some of these things, maybe we experience them as amplifications, because I know what you're talking about. I witness these tissues in the body, and I'm like, that ain't going too far. People I've had people hold onto the skull and guard it in class because they're like, it's going to fall apart.
It's gonna fall apart.
Because I feel these big movements in the living. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that's not falling apart. You know, you can take that apart with a baseball bat.
Yeah.
You
know, another example that comes to mind is a splinter. A splinter can be so tiny that you almost can't even see it sometimes. And it's like the most
so annoying.
It's the craziest
scratch on your cornea.
Overwhelming pain.
Right,
yeah, exactly.
It's like,
one hair in your eye. It's so tiny, but it's so it overtakes your whole consciousness with the sensation of it.
Yeah.
So I like your line of thinking there.
Just a way to get
like
into it because we have the experience. That person has the experience of this massive movement of this of the different skull bones relative to each other. You know, like that can't be happening. That's not happening.
Yeah.
Those are fused bones.
Yeah.
You know, and the fusion is not an accident. That's nature. It just that's a normal. It's good for your skull to fuse. You know.
Yes.
You don't want to have a baby's skull when you're an adult moving through the world of objects that we bash into. You want that protection.
Yes.
You know, this is a helmet. You know, the bowling ball helmet that we've got on here. You don't want it going all the time. You have to be on a different planet for that didn't have hard objects to bump into.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just just another story.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. I'm also very fond of the story that the so-called functional neurologists like to tell. Within chiropractic, there's a subdiscipline. They call themselves functional neurologists. Whatever we want to make of that term, I think it's a good enough term. But they emphasize a lot the proprioceptive resets that happen with adjustments, and so they say nothing about putting bones into place or out of place. They emphasize only the fact that whenever you do body work, it's creates a more accurate connection between brain to body, so to speak. And so that reset of proprioception, they would say, is the primary component of that's the story that they would tell.
Super interesting.
And I like that story very much.
Yeah,
and
that's
I think
interesting because it also explains the success of a variety of approaches to the same thing.
Yes. Yes. So I like that. And I'm also not holding that too tightly, but I think that it's a good part of it to keep in mind, you know, something like that. But I'll continue to think about it and I'll continue to figure it out. And maybe in 1,000 years I'll get to the bottom of it, and maybe not.
Probably not.
Probably not. That's okay.
We just spent a half an hour chatting.
Yeah, we did.
And I hope folks enjoyed it. I certainly did. And I enjoy you so much. I love you, my friend.
I love you too, Gil.
And we're concluding our session. We've had 5 sessions. 2 of them are you and me. He interviewed me, I interviewed him, and so thank you folks for coming. We have a beautiful and wonderful slate of folks coming tomorrow. We've got Allie and Ann, we've got Jan Damerholt, we've got Kathy Dooley, Jim Donak, Jim Pulciani tomorrow on day 3 of our amazing Institute for Anatomical Research Summit. This was so much fun today. Thank you, Bob and Joe and Jules and Madhav and our staff in the background. Of course, Jim, who we'll talk with tomorrow, Kelly, Carla, everybody. Thank you so much, Bonnie. We love you all. See you all tomorrow.